Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast, and normally I'll tell you here that we're reviewing a movie right now, and I'll say what the movie is and do my spoiler warning nonsense. No. Today is a special episode. We are doing a countdown. We are doing our top 25 sci-fi movies of the 1980s. We've both made our own lists. I've got my top 25. David's got his. And we're going to alternate between us and reveal what our lists are. And that'll take however long it takes. And this is something that... This is the first time David's done one of these, actually. I've done a few of these with Tara in the past, back in the day. I'm sure at some point it'll be worthwhile enough of a gap to go back and do some of those other decades again. Once, you know, I've seen some more. David's not given his list yet, so there'll be a lot of intrigue in there anyway. But we haven't done the 80s yet, so this is the first one David's jumping on for. So, yes, and interestingly, because of how limited your experience with a lot of movies of this era was when you started this show, it means, like, at least 80% of your list is probably movies you watched for the first time in the last, like, year and a half.
80 is undercutting it, but yes, absolutely. I've been prepping for this for pretty much a year now. I hopped onto Ace beginning of last year, and then you decided to, or not beginning, end of the year before. And
it was like November-ish time.
Yeah. And you told me about the top 80s probably within the first month or two of us doing the show, like how that was coming up, and I've just been prepping for it ever since.
Yeah, I gave you enough lead time to prep. So we're here, we're going to do it, and we'll see how it turns out. Now, a couple of things to mention. I am curious to see, maybe at the end I'll look back at my list and say, oh, how many were first time watches for me over the course of doing the show, and how, you know, I'll be curious. But we should explain the hold rule, which is something that is going to pop up here, especially since I imagine there will be a lot of overlap between the two lists.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
When one of us reveals a movie, if the other person has also got that movie on their list at a later time, the other person will say hold, and that means we don't talk about it until it comes up on the list later on. So a little bit of tension every time someone says something, and we'll get to it later. But it saves us trying to pretend to have a second conversation about the same movie again. So that is the idea. So I believe I've said everything that needs to be said. Obviously, I'll promote Patreon and stuff properly at the end. But hey, you can get bonuses and support everything on Patreon. Go do that. Yes. But without further ado, we're going to start off. David, what is your number 25?
Well, my 25, I have a three-way tie. So for anyone who doesn't know, right before this began, Pete told me I'm not allowed to break any of his rules, one of which is no ties. So I just had to get that right out the gate.
I know, sold it because I wasn't giving you the satisfaction.
I know. No, so for number 25, I actually, as I was sitting down, I was working through the films. I was actually kind of surprised that this one made my top 25, because if you had told me as I was like going into it that it would eventually be there, I don't think I would have believed you. But that film is Night of the Comet. I think that movie is just, it's not, you know, an amazing film. It's not something that is, you know, groundbreaking in any regards, but it is a perfect little encapsulation, I think, of the 80s. And it just has enough of its own identity to it. It's got this own, I don't want to say style, because there are a bunch of other things that did the same sort of thing, but it's, I don't know, it's just this quirky little thing that there's been a bunch of scenes from that movie that have consistently just been playing in my head ever since I watched it. And it's just something that's managed to live on despite itself, if I'm being honest. Also, I said when I talked about The Blob, that there was the one main actress, I think it's Catherine Mary Stewart, if I'm correct. Or no, sorry, that's not The Blob. That's Last Starfighter. Last Starfighter. I thought she was incredible in that, and I was surprised that she didn't actually manage to get any other massive roles, and this is where she did. This was her other leading role, and I think she really owned up to it and made it her own. So, Night of the Comet, number 25.
Yeah, it's a decent little movie. I wouldn't say it's a great movie, or even an overly good movie, but it's a decent enough watch if you like this era.
Yeah, it's just something about like the scenes at the very end and the scene in the radio station. They just live in my head rent free, and I don't know why. And it's just solid enough to get onto the 25 for me.
Okay, that's fair enough. My number 25 is Videodrome.
You're good. Keep going.
All right. Honestly, one of the surprising things when I was making this list is how many potential Cronenberg movies there were that could make the list. And there is one that arguably could make the list if it was more fresh in my head and I was confident as to why I like it or what I like about it. But Videodrome is one that was done on the Ace, and it kind of went up a little bit in my estimation after doing it on the Ace. It's just a really cool story about the idea of something secret in like an analog signal. The idea that this pirate radio station has been beamed from somewhere and no one knows where, but it's like snuff movies, and it becomes this obsession of trying to figure out what it is, and it's all about perversions and taboo and like pushing the envelope, and at what point are you just pushing and it's more soulless and whatnot. It's got some insane effects, some practical effects. It's got that signature Cronenberg kind of weirdness to it, and it's one that I think does get better on repeat viewings. So it's one that's it's went up the rankings a little bit for me with my two separate viewings, and I wonder if it'll keep doing so. But obviously, the only thing that might put you off it is the lead actor is like a creep in real life. But other than that,
no, there was quite a bit of Cronenberg that I had on one version of my list here. I did actually have this probably around 24 or 25. It did end up just getting bumped off, but no, I can absolutely understand why Videodrome. Out of all the ones that I've seen from Cronenberg, there is one very notable exception that we have not done on the show that probably could have made this list. Out of what I've seen from him, I think that it is probably the best out of that.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I think it's his best, because there may be more Cronenberg to come, but...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I'm telling you what I'm thinking of that. But... I'm not huge on Cronenberg to begin with. I'm a little scaredy baby, and he knows how to tap into that.
All right, okay. Yeah. Now, Videodrome's is cool. It taps into a very particular era in terms of like the technology that it's playing with, in this idea of rogue signals. And yeah, you can have like the dark web now, and you can have like you found the snuff video somewhere on like a website that's kind of weird or whatever, but there's something just a bit more, the idea of like signals and like airwaves, where you can literally dial between different frequencies and there's something secret on one of them. It feels a little bit more spooky, and it's always like hearing something coming through the static or seeing like a rogue signal is always felt much cooler than any kind of like modern interpretation of that, which is like, oh, the computer goes all pixely and someone's like hacked your computer and you're getting a signal that way. That's just never felt as cool as the old way of doing it. It's something about the analog just leaving enough wiggle room that something could be in there that's unexpected. Whereas with computers, everything's, it's ones and zeros. Like there's something there isn't. Like it feels.
Yeah, it seems harder to like corrupt. It seems harder for there to be something living in there.
So no, it really taps into that, which I really like. Oh, that's the surface level stuff, and then you've got all the sort of the more human themes that it gets into. But
yeah. All
right, what was your number 24?
Number 24 for me was Twilight Zone the movie.
You may continue.
All right. This one was kind of a bit hard for me. It was definitely something that I think I wanted to put on as a top 25, but because it is an anthology movie, it is hard to judge it of what specifically am I putting onto this list compared to what do I think deserves to be set off of it. If I'm looking at the movie as a whole, I do think that it is just this nice little encapsulation of sort of 80s style. You have literally all of the top directors of the time are working on this movie. They're all lending credence to it, and I think that it comes out as, I think we said it was a little bit less than the sum of its parts, but some of those parts are still very well done. I think that the sequence with the young boy who has like the godlike powers, I think that sequence was absolutely fantastic. I think that it does a great job of setting that forward. There's obviously one or two sequences that we weren't as fond of, but that's basically the reason why it's not getting higher on the list. I think that as what it still is a great little 80s movie, and it's something that is, for the most part, worth checking out.
Okay.
There's just that one sequence, which I don't want to spoil anything, but there's that one sequence in there which neither me or you was really that fond of. And like,
Yeah.
if you can fast forward and just skip that scene, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good movie. I always feel weird with anthologies just because there is kind of an up and downs of the quality and like because you're considering it as a whole package. So for me, I never really considered it would make my 25.
Right.
But that's not to say there's not good stuff in it, because I did praise some stuff in it when we talked about it. But yeah, it is interesting though, because that's a movie in the 80s doing nostalgia for something from the 50s and 60s.
Right.
Because we're so used to doing nostalgia for the 80s in present, and we're still doing it and I don't mind. Some people are sick of the 80s aesthetic, but I guess I'm just a filthy millennial who's quite happy to always enjoy that, so it's fine for me. But
there's probably at least like 25% of my list is on here just because, like, damn, did it capture the 80s just spot on. Love it.
Yeah. My number 24 is Starman.
Hold.
We got a hold. We got a first hold.
I do have a hold. Yep.
All right. Okay. In that case, what is your number 23?
My 23, I guarantee, is not on your list. It is one that we have not done on the show yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did branch out a little bit. There are a few movies that I remember from my childhood that I just wanted to rewatch and have on this. And this is one I know you wouldn't put on. This is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
You can continue. I'm so sorry. I thought that was implied.
No, absolutely. I'll be upfront here. This movie has severe pacing issues. This movie has absolute like problems with it. I'm not going to pretend it is a perfect movie, but much like Night of the Comet, so much of this movie lives in my head rent free. Like the entire like third act of this movie is just absolutely perfect in terms of just throwing out one-liners, setting up these iconic situations that I find hilarious. I think that is a very funny movie overall. There are so many tiny little moments to it that are so completely bananas and off the wall that like it's amazing to me that this doesn't have a bigger cult following. Like, I know that it did get that third one, like 4 years ago at this point.
Yeah, it definitely has a following. Like, people do love it.
But I'm surprised it's not talked about more. I honest to God, I think that this one, and also, I'm a sucker for time travel movies. It was always going to be a little bit extra. So I'm going to give it to Bill and Ted here just because it does just scratch an itch for me in terms of the 80s, in terms of being this funny little time travel movie. And it's not a good movie, but it is enjoyable enough to get it up to this point.
I suspect that not seeing this when I was young hurt my potential appreciation for it, because I didn't see it until I was in like my mid-20s, and it was fine. Like, like, there was the odd thing. Some things have aged a little bit, but for the most part, it's a fine. But it's very light. It's definitely more on the dumb side of sci-fi. And I don't mean that to be like dismissive of it, but it's definitely veering, and forgive me for this comparison, but it's definitely veering more towards like a Dude, Where's My Car than it is to a Back to the Future, which is the other end of the time travel spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. I if I had to put it on there, like, there is no rules to their time travel. Like, if you try to figure out how they're time traveling, no rules whatsoever. But I don't care. Like, it's just fun enough, and I just get enough enjoyment out of it that I'm willing to forgive it. Okay.
My number 23 is Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Ugh, you can go ahead.
This is a movie that is like 95% of what I like about it is just the aesthetic. It's got this industrial, grungy feeling to it. It doesn't feel like it's set in our world. It feels like it's set in its own weird, demented little world that has its own rules. And it's about a guy who just slowly starts to turn into a machine. But not like he turns into a Terminator. No. Just different parts of him start turning to random different machine parts, and he keeps getting more and more. It's got a little bit of dark humor in there, particularly with the drill bit that kind of like his penis once was,
Mm-hmm.
and some other things. It's just this creative, full of practical effects, crazy visuals. There are 2 sequels that still need to get done on the show, so it's definitely something that might get returned to at some point.
Yeah,
But
that was the second homework I ever did, and I was not prepared for that.
that was like episode 10 of the show as well. That was like,
Yeah.
that was one of the first things I watched as a first time watch on the show. So, you know, to answer that question I started with, this is one that I discovered during the show, as opposed to one that I knew from before. So, yeah, I've heard it referred to as industrial, and it's a weird word to give to a movie for like it's like one of its genres, but I can kind of see it. Like it feels kind of like industrial punk.
Yeah, it's weird to me that this actually is even 80s, because it just strikes me as that very early 90s kind of like MTV grunge, you know?
I mean, it's the tail end. It's like 1989.
Well, yeah. Fair.
So it's
but even then, it feels like
cusp.
this was developed a little. This feels at least like 92, 93. But yeah, snuck in early.
Hey, look, Japan was ahead of the curve. Okay, they got to that little era a bit
Look,
quicker.
I'm not sure if America has quite reached the drill bit penises yet, but we'll get there.
Oh dear. So yeah, super memorable, super just an experience that, like, I guarantee you there's not a single movie on my 25 or your 25 that is like Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Correct.
So I highly recommend, if you want something a bit different, you want something that's going to wake you up a little bit, then watch Tetsuo the Iron Man. And it's very short as well. It's like 65 minutes or something like that. It's like super quick watch. So give it a try. David, what was your number 22?
22, we're picking up the first hold. I put Starman.
Oh, okay. No, not a big gap. Yeah, it's very different for Carpenter because it's a more romantic drama, science fiction. This is a movie about an alien who comes to Earth and a woman's like dead husband is like sort of used as a template for what he turns into, to like, because he can form a human identity. So he turns into her dead husband and ends up going on a road trip with her. And it's kind of this like second chance for her, even though it's not actually her husband. And it's but it's got like a really good score. It's got kind of, it's almost like because when you think of like other alien movies from the 80s, right, you think of something like E.T. or you think of something whatever, it's kind of like that but for adults, but not in like a super gritty like, oh, we're doing a dark story kind of thing, but more just that instead of kids hiding an alien and like being chased by feds, this is like, no, people are chasing them because the government of course wants the fact that there's an alien out there somewhere and they're going to hunt them down. But it's more of this like one-on-one romance of a human being or an alien who's like learning what being human is, and just I don't know. I like it. It really works for me in a way, even though it's a little bit schmaltzy at times. I will concede, but it's good.
Yeah, no, it reminds me what you were saying of the for adults. Like there's the movies where like, okay, a kid gets a spaceship, like Explorers or something like that, and that takes on a very different tone, a very different sense of wonder to something like Last Starfighter, where a teenager gets a spaceship, or, I can't think of anywhere an adult gets a spaceship, but I'm sure they exist as well. It's that same sort of thing with E.T., where like, okay, kids find an alien, and that's just kind of the whimsy and the wonder of it. But then Starman comes along, and that's a lot more of, okay, we're going to explore this more adult notion of like romance and like self-fulfillment and stuff like that. These ideas of something, of being able to get something out of this from a more adult level. And I think the movie does a good job of exploring that overall while still keeping up the sci-fi aesthetic of it without just fully 100% going into this deep philosophical, like, oh, but what does it mean to truly be human?
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
like, yeah.
You got the fish out of water stuff, what's lend some comedy. Jeff Bridges is very good in the movie, as is, what's he, Karen Allen is the name of the female lead?
Karen Allen.
Not Margot, not Robbie, not Margot Kidder, like some fools would remember.
Pete, it has been years. It's been years now. Gotta let it go. You gotta forgive.
It's just one of the old running jokes. I'm enjoying. I enjoy bringing it up. Starman's like, it's a really different Carpenter movie, but it definitely, like, I think holds up as being just like an experiment from him of doing something just a little bit different, because he did so many like horror and sci-fi movies that were, more scary or more tense or more, or even cool, even like you do cool action sort of sci-fi or horror. This was like something very different, and I think it mostly holds up. Honestly, it's very endearing. It's very wears its heart on its sleeve. It's very earnest.
Yeah, I also don't think it goes like too hard on any of the sci-fi concepts either. It doesn't like, the sequence where he takes the form of Jeff Bridges is pretty much the most special effects heavy it really gets until the end.
Sure. Well, outside of there's like an explosion and stuff at one point, but yeah, in terms of like the sci-fi special effects, yeah,
right.
That's pretty much it. All right, that was your 22. So my number 22 is Inner Space.
You may proceed.
Okay. There was going to be some Joe Dante on this list.
Yeah.
There was never not going to be Joe Dante. Inner Space is a super fun movie about a test pilot and a shrinking technology, which is going to shrink him down to potentially one day go into a human being. But bad guys storm the lab during the experiment, and he ends up getting injected into a random stranger who happens to be Martin Short. And it's a movie about one man shrunk down. He can speak to the man that he's inside of, and he has to convince this complete hypochondriac to be brave and go and help him like solve and save the day and like win over his girlfriend again. Meg Ryan's in the movie. But like a lot of Joe Dante movies, it's just got such a... It's so weird to say he's a director that's just really good at fun, but he's really good at having likable characters that you want to root for, of always feeling like he's being playful with whatever ideas they're using. Not that every idea is always going to be a winner, but it never feels cynical. It never feels like, oh, we did this because, like, I don't know, because we're being pretentious, or we did this because whatever. Like, it always feels like, oh, this seemed like something that would be fun. And if it ends up not being fun, you go, well, you know what? There wasn't a malicious intention in the effort of that scene or that moment. It's always, I just rewatched Gremlins 2 like last week just because I felt like it, and yeah, again that energy's just there. So yes, yeah.
No, I agree. I think that Starman was one that not Starman, sorry, Inner Space. Inner Space was one that I always thought that it was going to be more of something along the lines of Fantastic Voyage. It was always one that was going to be a bit more of like, oh, he's injected in the body, and we're just going to be like exploring him going through the body and doing different things to this guy, and then we just see like the wacky hijinks up top. But yeah, no, it's a good story overall. It's got this like deeper level to it with the bad guys and all that stuff, and I think that casting Martin Short in the role as the guy who has to react is a fantastic choice. I think the only, like, if this were filmed 10 years later, this would be Jim Carrey. Like, that's the kind of slapstick acting that it was going for, and Martin Short definitely delivers on that. So, no, I think it did a great job overall of keeping attention for what it was, and it was a very well-made film. And like you said, it was fun the whole way through, which if this took itself seriously at any point, I think it would have only harmed it in a lot of ways. No,
there's a lot of like solid supporting cast as well. Robert Picardo is this like weird cowboy character who comes in, or the villain's played by I forget his name, but the lead actor from the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So you've got like all these great supporting like actors, and then the bad guy from Commando is like the henchman Terminator dude who's hunting like the good guys. Like all of that stuff is super fun. But what makes it work though is that fundamentally what the actual premise of the movie, when you strip all the details away, is just about having these two different people. Like one's inside the other helping the other one, but one's cocky, overconfident, and his life is in shambles because he's too like got much of a temper with his cockiness. And then the other one's a hypochondriac, and he's the one that's actually in control up top. So he's got the other one sort of in his ear saying, hey, do this, do that. Like, that's the premise, and like that's where all the growth comes from. Everything else is just a vehicle to get to that, like, reality.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there's some fun stuff towards the end with that, like, two miniature people inside a body fighting and all that, which is a good time. So, yeah, no, good stuff. All right, what's your number 21?
21, I have Schwarzenegger in Running Man.
Hold!
All right, fair enough.
Yes. My number 21, very different tonally from what you just said. Threads.
Hold.
Ah, yeah, your first hold. Very good.
Yeah, I got that a little higher.
Nice, 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 nice. All right, what is your number 20?
I have completely different in tone than both of those movies again.
Oh?
And that is the little known film that we managed to touch on that I think was a vote winner, Man Facing Southeast.
Oh, you may continue.
All right. I don't know. I really remember this movie, which I think is just kind of saying a lot for how small of a movie it was. It was a movie that I think you had to send me the file for it just because we couldn't find anywhere that it was streaming. It was a very small sort of film. Obviously it was a foreign language film on top of that.
I would never do such a thing. Everything's completely
you're right.
above board.
Definitely. You sent me over the mail a DVD.
Yes.
And I watched it that way. But no, I just still occasionally, the same sort of way of Night of the Comet, I still occasionally think about this movie, and I have a few scenes in my head, like the scene where, and just to give a brief rundown of the movie, it's a man shows up in a asylum claiming to basically be an alien, and he starts improving the lives of everyone around him, including this doctor who's basically trying to figure out the truth to him. And over the course of the movie, he's kind of led to believe that, yeah, he might be legitimate. He might just be like an alien and is this guy who's here to help everything out. So it's a bunch of scenes that, much in the same way you were describing the Joe Dante film, it always feels very earnest. It doesn't feel like it's ever being manipulative. It doesn't feel like it's being like, oh, and here's the scene where this happens. It feels like it's just trying to get you to see the best in people. And then when it, like, by the time that we wrap up the movie and obviously a bunch of bad things have happened, like, you feel for these characters. You feel for how they've been put through the ringer and how the world just hasn't been fair to them, and how there is this level of, like, I don't want to say nihilism, but just this disappointment in how the world works, but always this feeling that you have to fight against it. You always have to be doing the positive thing regardless of how much you're shut down. So it's got a great message. I think that the sci-fi elements to it, while a bit more reserved, are very well done. And there's just, it's because it's reserved, there's just these tiny little hints that allow you to believe one way or the other as to whether or not he was who he claimed to be at the beginning. So very well made film.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely one I'd considered. I think it's the sort of thing where I'll need to see it at least one more time before it's really fighting for a spot. But yeah, it's got a really strong, like, narrative purpose that it's trying to get across, and it leaves it open for you to kind of interpret. But it's got some very memorable scenes. Like, I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't want to spoil anything. I'll just say the symphony and just leave it at that. So, all right, that was your number 20?
Yes, number 20.
Right. My number 20 is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
You can go ahead and take that. I meant to get to this one, but it would mean watching the original Star Trek, and I just didn't have the time.
You just mean the first movie, or do you mean like the entire original series?
I'm gonna say the original movie.
Okay. Yeah. If anything, the weird thing is, though, is the thing you should have watched. Well, you should probably watch the original movie regardless, but there is one episode of the original show you should at least watch, because Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is a sequel to an episode. Okay.
Well, I'm glad that I didn't try to do this then without seeing that episode.
I mean, it would still work without, but Khan was in an episode of Star Trek. He was in an episode called Space Seed. And it's called The Wrath of Khan because he's got reasons to be pissed.
He's upset.
Yeah, he's upset with Kirk and co. No, I mean, I actually really like the motion picture, but that wasn't eligible for this because that's a 70s movie.
Mm-hmm.
But Wrath of Khan, most people tend to put much higher. Most people even tend to say it's their favorite. Because it does get a bit more personal. There's more of an actual antagonist in this movie as opposed to the first one. Which I think is fine, because I think the first movie is kind of classic Trek in a lot of ways, where it doesn't necessarily need a villain per se, but this does have a villain who's pushing Kirk and the crew to their limits, and he feels like a genuine threat. There are big stakes and consequences to everything that happens in this. Some very famous sequences towards the end that are part of those consequences. So no, it's a good time, and I think the big thing is that Ricardo Montalban, who plays Khan, is so theatrical and so good in the role that he really makes the whole thing work. So you know, aside from that, you have kind of like everything's just a bit more refined. Everything just feels a bit more tight in terms compared to the first movie. Even though depending on the day, I might say I like the first movie more for the things it does and the way it harkens back to classic Trek. There's no denying that this is maybe objectively the better, tighter film in terms of how it actually like plays off the hero and the villain and the cat and mouse that kind of happens because of it. So yeah, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, number 20.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I am pro Star Wars or Star Trek, but in terms of experience, I know a lot more about Star Wars than Star Trek. So
Sure.
It's just one of my blind spots. Not that I don't think it doesn't deserve a spot on the list. I just never got around to it.
That's fair. What is your number 19?
My number 19 is the 1984 version of Dune.
This is interesting. You may continue, but I applaud the audacity of this.
Yes. Yeah. Here's the thing. A lot of my list was balancing, do I think this is a quality film that deserves praise, or do I think this is stupid fun that I just enjoy watching? And Dune is the like epitome of, boy, this is not a good movie, but it's fun. It's dumb fun. Like it's got a lot going for it. Obviously, I mean, we talked for quite some time about that. It was weird. It was different, a whole bunch of different, like, I think I used that as my homework, or the homework just before we saw the second Dune movie, whatever that one, just Dune Part 2.
Part 2, yeah. There wasn't a title. It's not complicated.
I was gonna say, because Dune Prophecy recently came out, so I'm got a bunch in my head where I'm like, does it have a subtitle? No, I viewed that for homework, and it was confusing. I was not following it well, and it was definitely a hard time. But the longer that I've been separated from it, the more that some of those scenes I have in my head even stronger than the first Denis Villeneuve movie. Like, it's so off the wall insane that I feel like just by virtue of how insane it is, it deserves a little spot here. Like, it deserves a mention. I don't want to put it up too ridiculously high, but I think that if you're talking about the 80s, there has to be some little conversation for Dune in there. So, yeah,
I will say, if we were doing a top 30, I think this would have cracked that number for me. Because it's not a great movie. In fact, it's a mess, but it's a glorious, interesting mess. It's beautiful to look at. It's full of practical sets and effects, or obviously some optical and miniatures and things like that. But the music with the electric guitar, I feel like I'm going bananas with everyone praising the new Dune movies, because I think they're just like, obviously they're solid in quality, but they're just so dull. I can't give a shit. But Dune from 1984, David Lynch's Dune, is like this weird thing that just, I don't know, like, I've seen it a couple times now, and it was fascinating on both occasions. So yeah, not a good movie per se, but I will take an interesting flawed failure over a bland, like, 6 out of 10, which is what I consider those movies. And I know that's crazy to most people. People love those Dune movies. I get it. People are absolutely bananas for them, but I feel nothing when I'm watching them. I feel absolutely nothing.
I get the sentiment. I understand it. It is sterilized to the point where it feels like it's too, I don't want to say clean, but like too
clinical. Yeah, it's clinical.
It's too by the book. It feels like this is how you make an epic movie, and then they just checked all the boxes.
Yeah, and also I like Kel MacLachlan more than Timothy Chalamet, but maybe that's another hot take.
I like him in general more than this, but there have been a few Chalamet roles that I do really enjoy him in. So
sure, I don't necessarily dislike Chalamet, but I do like MacLachlan more. But I mean, he was in Twin Peaks, and that's a lot to compete with.
That's absolutely where my mind goes first.
Yeah, so that was your 19, yes?
Yes.
Okay, changing tact here a little bit. So you were saying here a second ago about how you're measuring quality versus something that's just enjoyable to watch. Well, this is one of my, more personal taste picks, shall we say. Number 19 is Chopping Mall.
Not on my list. Go for it.
Oh, yes. That's actually a movie we reviewed on Streams, but it is robots. So, ergo, science
Screw
fiction.
you, it counts.
Yeah, well, it's in a mall, and they've got a new trio of robots that are security guards for the mall. A bunch of college-age people are to stay back into one of the department stores to party one night, and the killer robots, well, they're not supposed to be killer, but they go killer. A little lightning strike here to the control panel, and they are ready to start popping heads with the laser beams. And it's a fun time. And I have seen this movie like 5 times now, and it's never ceased to entertain me. Dick Miller's got a small role in it. Garrett Graham's got a small role in it. It also, in fact, actually, it has the younger sister from Night of the Comet. So someone for you to plus Barbara Crampton's in there, I think. Yeah, there's tons of like faces if you're into like B movies from this era to recognize. But it's got head explosions. It's got, you know, like just the characters being. It's not super smart in the way that they sort of like have to like be tactical, but it just makes enough logic that you can enjoy kind of the thought process of like, okay, let's get to the store that's got the guns in it so we can try and fight. Oh, the guns don't really do anything. Oh wait, have we got something that'll blow them up? Let's try and do that. Plus, it's the mall that's been in a couple of different movies, so you might recognize the mall from other stuff from this time period.
Fair enough.
But I want to say it's the same mall as Commando. But regardless, fun time and completely on the dumps end of the scale. But I cannot get enough of Chopping Mall. So
that's fine.
Shop till you drop.
At one point, I gave you a list of potential movies, just things that we hadn't done on the show, just to make sure that you considered them all to be sci-fi. And you specifically said, maybe add Chopping Mall onto that. So I understand.
So what you're saying is I'm consistent. I thought you were going to tell me that I contradicted myself, but no, I've been consistent.
No, you've been very consistent. Good job.
Good. Excellent. That's what's important. All right, what's your 18?
Number 18 for me, I have a feeling this is going to be higher up for you, but I'm not sure. Number 18 is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Hold!
Yep, I thought so. All right.
My number 18 in that case is They Live.
Hold.
We're holding. Lots of holding going on. All right, what's your number 17?
Number 17, I don't think you would have had this one because we didn't do it on the show. This is one that I watched back when I was probably like 14, 15 years old at first, and it just really stuck with me. It's something that I've enjoyed for a while, and that is 1983's War Games, starring Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy. For anyone who's not aware, this is a story of a bunch of kids who come across a computer program that they think is just a video game, and they decide to play the video game titled Thermonuclear Warfare, and wouldn't you know it, it ain't a video game. So they have to go out and stop World War III. It's fun. It's just a fun little movie, and I honestly think that the third act of this movie, where I can't spoil everything, but where they are finally facing down against the program in the final section, is one of the top moments for like AI computer villains ever. I think it's a great way, the way they deal with it. It's a top moment for me. And then all the time leading up to that, it's just a fun little, kids have to go across country. They come across a few people that can help them along the way. It's just a nice little sci-fi movie in terms of trying to take out this AI before it becomes a bigger deal. And then the character of Joshua, who is the computer to begin with, is also just by himself a great character because they added a little text-to-speech thing before it was super popular, and so it really did give him a lot of character even in these early 80 days.
You may continue.
Sorry. I thought that was... You jump in there with your loud little hold thing regardless.
Just because it's not directed, it shows that I've not seen it.
No, that's fair. I just assumed it wouldn't be on the list.
Yes, I have seen War Games. I'll be honest, like it sounded like a great premise when I sat down to watch it, and I remember just not feeling that passionate about it. But I only seen it once. It was a long time ago, so when we do eventually get to it on the show, I might feel definitely.
I mean, it also might just be a thing of when it, like, again, the same thing with Bill and Ted, where the characters in the movie are like 14, 15. I was 14, 15. It might have just hit me at the right time
maybe
to stick with me.
Maybe, but I think it was on a Patreon vote once or twice, and it didn't. And because we did a bunch of 80s votes on Patreon over the last year, so I'm sure it was on at least one of those and didn't win. So
probably.
All right. So that was your 17. My number 17 is Explorers.
You may continue.
You really had to double check there, though.
I did, because it was on my list at one point. I know it definitely made it.
Okay.
But it just dropped off the end at some point.
Yeah, this is kind of a definite personal pick in the sense that this is not a movie that I think is widespread loved, but I grew up with Explorers. It's another Joe Dante movie. It's probably the first Joe Dante movie I ever really fell in love with. It's about 3 kids who build a spaceship. That is the premise of the movie. And it came out the same year as The Goonies, and it goes right next to it. You can watch that in a double feature, and it's kids getting up to an adventure. One's obviously the pirate ship adventure in the tunnels with all the traps. This one's building a spaceship. Starring, funnily enough, a young Ethan Hawke, who I didn't know who Ethan Hawke was as a kid, but I definitely recognize him when I go back and watch it now. So
also River Phoenix
and River Phoenix, but I'm pretty sure this is the only thing I've ever seen him in, though. So I know he's a name that people talk about, and he died tragically young and all that, but like he's just a kid in this to me. So,
yeah, that's fair. Let's see what else he was in. Continue.
Yeah. Now the movie, it's a bit uneven. It does kind of go wild in the third act, and apparently I didn't know this until relatively recently. Technically there was more to get made, and they were told, no, you're done, just wrap it up and finish. So who knows what what they'd have done if they hadn't had to finish like shooting it or making it early. But even in spite of all that, though, the sense of adventure of like, oh, these kids can pull this off, they've somehow thought of a way to build a spaceship and do this on their own. The sense of like wonder and awe, particularly for the main character who loves science fiction movies and is like fantasy, you're dreaming about it and thinking about it and wants to go do it. There's a sense of like just the sort of thing because when you're a kid, like so many little things can feel like an adventure. So the idea that a movie can come along and have the kids go on a literal adventure that is larger than life, which is kind of what Goonies also tapped into. Explorers is just. I always watched it as much as the Goonies growing up, and it always clicked with me. I like the score. I like the. I always like space more than pirates. So that, which is not to say that I necessarily think it's a better movie than Goonies, but just the premise itself inherently, like, was something that spoke to me. Especially since it kind of tapped into a love of movies as well, since that's where the love of the idea comes from for the main character. So. Right. And Joe Dante, funnily enough, does make a lot of movies that are about the love of movies. It does pop up a lot in his films, so it's another example of that. So Explorers, love it. It's definitely a personal pick, but it's never not going to be here for an 80s list for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I think for me, the third act may have just soured me a bit too much. I think that's what ended up dropping it off, is that it didn't feel like it had a conclusive or cohesive whole that it was really going for. But I do agree that the first 2 acts are just stupidly fun. Like, they are just exactly that sort of kid wanting to go on an adventure, doing this sort of stuff, and it strikes that same sort of Goonies tone that you were talking about. Yep,
definitely.
I will say,
if you like Stranger Things, there's a lot of like DNA in here for that as well.
I will say River Phoenix, the other things you may or may not know for is Stand By Me, which is also one of those like childhood adventure films, just not sci-fi.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And then he was young Indiana Jones in Last Crusade.
Oh, right, okay. And that one flashback, okay. All right, fair enough. Stand By Me is one that I only saw once in my 20s. I never grew up with that.
Yeah, that's fair.
But all right, what's your number 16?
Number 16 is picking up an old thread. It's Threads.
Ah, all right, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, this one, look, I don't live in the UK. I didn't recognize any of the stuff they were talking about there, but dear God, I can only imagine what it was like when this came out and aired on TV. Because this, like, I was watching on a sunny day in the privacy of my own living room, the ability to pause and walk away at any time, and it messed me up, man. it is such a dour look. Like, there's so many other films that are coming up on this list, and even like war games that I just talked about that are all about like the 80s, like the Cold War sort of aspect. Like, the Russians have bombs, we have bombs, we could destroy the world at any minute. But all of them view it through this lens of, but things are probably going to be okay. Like, or, oh, we can all do something about it. Threads is the first one that like comes out and says, we're all going to die and you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, because I'd never heard of this until I went looking for like 80s gems that maybe I haven't seen. And Threads popped up in a couple of places, you know, whether it was like best of lists or Reddit threads or whatever it was. And I remembered, like, because the title of the review, which was right before you joined the show, it was like a month before or something like that.
Yes.
Was like, oh, the best, like, you know, 80s sci-fi movie you've never seen. And like a couple of people who are clearly, you know, twice my age are like, oh, what are you talking about? This was huge when it came out in 1984. I'm like, dude, I wasn't born yet. What are you talking about? Right,
you got to check the YouTube demographics and see exactly who's watching this.
But yeah, this was a hell of a discovery. It is funny though, because I think when I sat down to watch it, the first like 40 minutes or whatever it is, I remember thinking, this is just whatever. Like, I don't know, like, it's just a bunch of like people in England just living their lives, and it's relatively boring to a point. There's obviously some teases of what's coming, but it's mostly just like, here's these people, these two young people are getting married and their relationships going through some struggles, and it's kind of dull, and then it happens, and it's almost like because of how dull and normal and realistic all the characters were before then, that it makes this all hit so hard when the nuclear bomb goes off. And like seeing the instant turmoil, and then just going through all the stages of like, here's what the initial days would be like, here's what 2 weeks later would be like, here's what a month would be like later, here's what a year would be like, and you know, it keeps going to whatever extent by the end. And it's just it's a depressing as shit movie about how horrific it would be. Not even just the initial blast, but just like it'd almost be worse if you survived. Living in this afterwards is going to be worse. So yeah, it's a dire movie that pulls no punches, and like, you know, effectively scares everyone into thinking, maybe we shouldn't be launching nuclear missiles. Maybe we should try and avoid that if we can. I
mean, that's really the absolute best kind of movie, is the type that gets people talking not about the movie itself, but about what the movie is talking about. And I think that Threads probably did a fantastic job with that. Obviously, I wasn't around for it, but the fact that people are still be able to look at that today and it still manages to pack a punch means that we haven't moved that far.
Yeah, that said though, I will say that also limits its potential on a list like this for me, I think, because fundamentally it doesn't have like, because it is just its message, fundamentally it doesn't have like main characters that I'm really engaged in or rooting for. It doesn't have, you know, your normal narrative swings. Like, it's very different from most other movies, and it's very successful what it's trying to be, but it does all, like, this is weird to say because it's science fiction and it's something that's not actually happened, but it almost feels like a docudrama of something that's just not happened yet. And that sort of, that's what gives it the impact that it has and makes it feel so real. But it's also what I think stops it from being like an all-time favorite like movie that you can put on that'll make you feel, you know, ups and downs and swings and all the other things you want to feel from a movie. So
yeah, it's hard. Like, I couldn't tell you any of the characters. I can tell you visuals and I can tell you themes, but you're right. There's that lack of a deeper connection, because by the time the movie's done, you're forced to basically sever all of that in order to keep any sort of emotional stability.
Quite right. All right. What number was that?
That was my 16. All
right. My number 16 is Scanners.
You may continue. This did make a version of my list, but not the one I've got.
Yeah, so this was another Cronenberg, and this is one that I had seen before, but when we did it on the show, I'm like, oh, you know what, this is better than I remember. Like, I'd clearly kind of, my memory was hazy on this, and this is basically a story about telepaths are a thing. You know, they're called scanners, and they're starting to become a thing, and it's effectively like a sort of dark, gritty thriller version of the X-Men in a weird way, where it's like, how do we start, like, you've got someone who's trying to like raise some of them in peace to make them have happy lives, and you've got evil government people who are like, no, we need to like raise them to be soldiers for us. These are the new weapons of the 21st century kind of thing. And you've got Michael Ironside as effectively the Magneto of this telekinetic, like race. And we follow kind of his opposite as the main character. And it really explores the idea of what this would be like if these people existed and what everyone would be doing. Plus, it probably has the single greatest head explosion ever captured on movie film. So, yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I remember Scanners as having a bunch of good moments, but for me, like collectively, the story just didn't hold up as well as something like Videodrome. I think
That's
that
fair.
I would still put Videodrome a little bit higher in terms of the whole movie overall. Like you said, the head explosion moment, by the time you hit the third act, there's a few good scenes there. I just remember there being this very long lull in the middle where I just was losing interest in the movie, and it didn't do anything to really keep me captivated.
Yeah, like I say, I think it went up for me a little bit on a second viewing, so I wonder if maybe you'll feel similar once you sort of get into it and you can kind of like take in the details a bit more. But yeah, no, I was... if anything, I was kind of surprised when I was doing this list and thought, you know what, Scar should be higher, and it ended up being bumped up from just under 25 to somewhere in the the bottom 10 here.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it is what it is. All right, what is your number 15?
I think you said this one before. I think this is picking up a hold. They Live.
Yep.
So I'm a sucker for some good old fashioned anti-Reagan propaganda. Like, you go for it, man. This is absolutely. This is also Carpenter, correct?
Yes.
Yep. This is. I don't. It's not my highest Carpenter on here, but it is a solid entry here. I do feel like it is also one of those times where he's doing something a little bit different from what he normally does, because it isn't straight horror. It isn't straight like this menacing deeper thing. It's almost a dark comedy in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I really vibed with what it was saying. I really enjoyed the main character here. It had a very solid plot, despite the fact that there is a massive turn in the third act of like how things are handled. I think that overall, I just like the messaging and the morality of it and how the characters deal with the world that they live in.
Yeah, I think this is another one that when I did it on the show, it was kind of a pleasant reminder of why it was good, and it kind of bumped up a little bit for me. Because I always remember the fight scene. Everyone remembers the fight scene between Roddy Piper and Keith David. But, like, the actual way the story progresses of, like, the slow realization of what's going on and what the subliminal messages are and all that stuff and the sunglasses, that stuff, like, is actually very well paced and really is quite intriguing as the story goes on. And that's the sort of thing that I think I'd forgotten about. I will say, to give it a little ding, I do think occasionally, like, notably the most famous line of the whole movie, I actually think is not delivered very well. Roddy Piper's I came to, chew bubblegum and kick ass and I'm all out of bubblegum. His line delivery of that line's not actually that good. It feels wrong. It feels off in its delivery.
I think the line stands well, completely separated from the movie, like written down and even just like the individual scene itself. But if you take into context what the scene is, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's just the inflection's just a bit off for me more than anything. But but regardless of that though, it's a very strong, slow burn, like sci-fi thriller that slowly reveals something that's going on. And again, it's very deep rooted in the politics, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I liked it more watching it as an adult, is because the first time I saw it I was probably like 16 or something like that, and probably did not get a lot of what it was saying or doing, beyond the broad strokes of like, consumerism and the control and all that. I got that the first time. But there's a bit more to it than that I think you get if you're going into it with a bit more of an adult viewpoint. So
you pick up on the nuances and whatnot.
Yeah, no, Leila, very good. So that was your number 15?
15.
Yeah. My number 15, I believe, is returning to a hold from you, and that is The Running Man.
Yes, that was my 21.
Yeah, so this is an Arnold movie based on a Stephen King story, of all things, and it's getting remade soon by Edgar Wright, which is a weird bit of trivia.
I know you have your ups and downs with the man, but I trust him. I think there's some major quality there.
I've had more downs with Edgar Wright than I've had ups at this point, which is a real shame because Hot Fuzz is like a masterpiece, but there's been a lot of downs for me with that man's career. Running Man is just one of those endlessly fun, cheesy Arnold movies that people will dismiss it as dumb fun, but I think people who dismiss it as that don't realize like how much worse something like this can be if it's not well paced, if it's not got the lead actor with charisma. Like, because at this point, having done all these review shows, I've seen enough crap that on paper sounds like it should be as good as one of these movies from the 80s, but it isn't. And why isn't it? Why isn't this dumb action movie as good as something like Commando? It's because even this more lighthearted, no depth type of action movie still needs to have a lot of craft to make it work and be effortless in the way it feels like. And that is pacing, it's the structure, it's having the charisma of the actors, it's having good one-liners, it's having all this stuff. And this movie is peak that for Arnold. It's Arnold one-liners. Sub-Zero, now, Plane Zero. Like, it's that stuff. It's full of bright lights. Obviously, you could do a darker, grittier take on this dystopia future where criminals are put on a game show where everyone cheers as they are murdered. Like, you could do a much more cerebral version of that story, but the cheesy 80s action movie version of that story is still a winner because it's still full of colorful characters. You've got like all the various gladiator type like hunters that go after them. Like, and honestly, one of the big standouts of this movie is the villain, who was a real game show host, from what I understand, is just amazing at being an evil game show host in this.
Yeah, that's the part that really gets me. Like, I think that the pomp and circumstance of it, like the whole, we got a game show where we put criminals on, in concept is okay. It's fine. But what they really nailed here is making it feel like this is the most popular show in this world. It really played up that sort of, this is an 80s show, like, and here is this game show host who has all of this charisma and all of this energy that's just bursting out, and you feel it.
Do you know what in a weird way is? It, like, the more mature version of this, bizarrely, is The Truman Show.
Yeah.
Right? I can see a lot of parallels between them in a weird way.
I mean, I think you have the different, like, there's a version of it that's kind of Squid Game. There's a version of it that's kind of Hunger Games, where it's stuff done for the entertainment of others, and it's this level of you just have to do it,
Yeah. There's multiple tones you could take with this, but I honestly, I find this one endlessly watchable. The synth, the 80s version of what the future might be, just, it works for me in so many levels. Like, you have characters gathered around a flaming barrel as they're betting on who's going to make it in the Running Man, and I'm like, yes is exactly what it should be. So
I would say for me, this movie is a slower start, but by the time it hits the third act, I'm all in. Like, I really like the way that this movie wraps up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not the best Arnold movie, or even the best fun Arnold movie. I mean, it's not on this list, but Commando would be beating this if I'm just doing Arnold movies.
Right.
So, but it's very solid and very entertaining. So yes, that's Running Man. What's your number 14?
Number 14, I went and hit the 80s, hitting the 50s. I did The Blob.
Hold.
All right, fair enough.
All right. My number 14 is Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home.
Well, I think it made it pretty clear that certain films are not on my list, so you are free to continue.
Yeah, this, like, as good as Wrath of Khan is, right? And as much as I like chunks of the other ones, like, I love the opening act of 3 Search for Spock, but Voyage Home, which is the one where they time travel to present day 1986, and they have to find whales because the space thing that's happening in space needs whales to respond to it, and because they're extinct in the future, they have to come back to present day. So we get all the fish out of water stuff with the Enterprise crew interacting with the present day world. That's all just a lot of fun. It's got a clear, simple idea. Obviously, it's talking about the threat of extinction and how we should take care of the species that are on Earth and all that. So it's got a nice environmental message to go along with it. But it's just so much fun and heart, and it makes some interesting little decisions as well as far as like the story. that I really appreciate. Like there's a like Kirk kind of has a love interest in present day, and where that goes at the end, I actually think is the opposite of what most movies would do. Like most movies would sort of just do it this easy way to chicken out of something, and this movie just says, "Nah, let's just go for it. Why not?" So,
Right.
it's fun stuff. It's actually kind of weird because it's the Star Trek movie where there's no Enterprise, because it continues on from 3 where they had like a Klingon bird of prey, and that's actually the ship they've got in this movie. So they don't have the Enterprise. Maybe they introduced an Enterprise at the very end, but that's just the ending. It's not like
Right. Most of the movie.
So, no, very, very good time, and it's by far, I think, the most fun of the original cast movies is Voyage Home. And I think while my favorite Star Trek episodes, broadly speaking, aren't necessarily the funny ones, although there are some good ones that fall into that camp, for whatever reason with the movies, this is the one that just hit the hardest for me in my taste. Even though a lot of my favorite episodes tend to be the ones with the more serious issues where there's like real, speeches being made about the rights of man and blah 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 and all that stuff and ethics and whatnot. This is not quite that, but it's just the most watchable one of the whole bunch. So yeah, Star Trek 4 is my number 14. What is your number 13?
My number 13 is a film from 1984 titled 1984.
You may continue.
Really? This is not on your list at all?
No, I mean I liked it, but it's it's a dour time.
I mean, yeah, but Threads is my counterpoint to that. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm as much as I love time travel stuff, my other sucker is good political messaging, good little, fight the man, fight the power, don't let fascism rule sort of stuff. I think this movie was an extremely well-made film that got across the points of the book. It is absolutely I don't want to say like it's not a perfect adaptation. Obviously, there are some stuff that had to be dropped, some stuff that had to be changed, but I do like the way that they change things. I think that this movie does a great job of driving home not only how the world is structured and really getting you into the mindset of these people, not just on the side that of the ones who like you're supposed to be in the shoes of, the ones that are against like the fascism and whatnot, but also you understand why people would go for it. You understand why this world is built this way, and you see through the eyes of these other just normal people and how they've managed to be broken down over time. So I think it does a great job of presenting that, and also just it's a solid story. If we even ignore the adaptation stuff, it is a solid story from beginning to end that just takes this man and puts him through the ringer and just shows how he comes out the other side. So I can't say that it is, a great story overall in terms of like feeling good. I don't think that it's got a good like hero's journey or anything like that, but I think that the story being told is one that should be told. It's a solid movie throughout.
Yes, it's a dystopian film about society being policed so heavily that no one can decide to do anything. Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just there's one part in the movie where all of a sudden everything shifts. Like it's not like the society itself shifts, but like the things that the propaganda is saying all of a sudden just turn on a dime, and now it's the exact opposite thing being said. And that's like the thing that hit too hard for me, where it was just seeing the stuff was just like, oh yeah, no, we always meant this. We always were actually saying this. And it's like, no, I have proof to the opposite. And it's like, well, we don't care about proof. And it's like, God, I hate it. But also, bravo movie, you did it perfectly.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a solid movie. I mean, I only saw it for the first time, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whenever we did it in the show. And I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad that because there's a couple of things in it that I've seen referenced in other stuff that I never realized were references to 1984. So it was very good to have that context. But definitely yeah, like, I mean, John Hart's good in it, and it's definitely got the oppressive atmosphere you want from it. I think this is another one that maybe on repeat viewings it might grow on me, and like I might appreciate it more and whatnot. But I mean, I did consider it. It was kind of on the short list that just didn't make the cut. But
okay,
all right.
Fair.
So that was your 13.
Yes.
My number 13 is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
All right, that was my 18.
Yeah. Honestly, this is one that if I hadn't done it on the show last year, it probably wouldn't be this high, and it may not even have made the list, because while I had fond memories of it, I didn't necessarily remember it enough to know that it was actually good. But watching it again as an adult and realizing, oh, this actually really holds up. This is legitimately funny as a comedy, but it's also a legitimately good adventure story with tons of practical like sets and stuff for the small, because it's about kids that get shrunk down. And the main thrust of it, though, is they get kind of tossed out with the garbage, which is at the back of the back garden, and they then have to try and walk through the backyard to get back to the house. So it's like them going through a jungle, but everything they encounter in the grass is, just like, well, to them it's giant, but, it's actually a regular-sized ant, or it's a regular-sized, bug of this kind, or whatever. It's just such a simple, fun idea that it's like they're going through like a theme park ride, but in like the best possible way. The kids are all likable, the parents are very likable in the way they play off of each other. The sort of rivalry between the parents and like the neighbor parents who are like angry all the time, like legitimately funny. Also, the wife of the neighbors is Buffy's mum from the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
There you go.
I'm sure there was probably another movie I could have shoehorned a reference into earlier, but that's the first one that popped out in my head.
Let's start over the countdown. We'll just
let's go back
turn
to the
every
start.
movie somehow. Like, did you know this guy also starred with the actor who played Angel? And Angel, of course, came from.
Hey, don't tempt me. I'll try it. But there's just so many bits of this movie as well that because I watched a lot as a kid that stick out to me. I always remember the big sister dancing with a mop at the start of the movie. I always remember, just all these little bits and pieces that are fun, or just like them running from the broom, which is this giant, just these giant bristles coming at them. It's just such a simple but fun idea for a movie. And what's wild about it, trivia-wise, is that it was actually written by the people who did Reanimator, which I actually wrestled whether or not I should be including that in this list. I decided against it because it veers more towards horror comedy than it does sci-fi. But I can see the ingredients in here and how this was originally an R-rated idea. Like they didn't film it as an R rating or anything like that. It was changed long before they filmed it. But based on the people that wrote this, I can totally see the version of this, which is like a more of an R-rated, dark, like comedy.
Oh yeah, one of those kids was definitely supposed to die against the ants.
Oh, for sure,
like 100%.
Yeah, I could see that. But
yeah,
like I can totally see Jeffrey Combs playing Wayne Szalinski instead of Rick Moranis, and just how different that makes the movie.
yeah. No, I wouldn't be surprised if this like the first concept of it was some sort of Reanimator sequel or something like that. Just be like, oh yeah, now we shrink, and it's like, wait a minute, hold on. No, there's a lot more to this.
It's a Disney adventure that kids can go see. And I'm not saying they made the wrong choice, because I like the movie they made. It's very high in quality, so there's no complaints. But it's just interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, for me, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I think what really stands out to me is the absolute overabundance of practical effects. It would have been so easy to just short out and say like, yeah, well, they're just, we'll specifically film this in an area that like, we can get away with using like a more traditional set for, but no, they go all the way and say like, we have built 12 by 12, like, or probably even bigger than that, like several hundred feet of grass that these characters are going to walk through. We built a giant Lego. We have built an oatmeal cream pie. Like, I am always going to be impressed by the number of practical effects that they decided to do. And when they do use special effects, they work. It's not like anything stands out as not fitting in with the rest of the sequence. So top tier marks. Yeah.
Really very little to complain about. And all the characters get a nice little arc as well. Like it's very tightly written in that sense. Everyone has a story from start to end. And I like how obviously, the older boy from next door and the sister, clearly there's a romance potential there. But I love that there's also like different pairings of like character arcs where the sister bonds with the shitty little brother from next door. The big brother from next door bonds with the little brother from the main house. And like there's a lot of overlapping like friendships that are formed that are all unique in how they interact with each other. It feels like a good web of characters.
Yeah, I think for most other movies, when they split up characters like that, it hurts the movie because it forces like the group dynamics to disappear a little bit. But this one just handles it masterfully by using that time in order to develop these independent pairings that you wouldn't otherwise see.
Yeah, because it usually addresses like like their weaknesses or whatever. Like you'll have like the shitty little brother from next door being like, "Oh, what's it like having such a dweeb for a little brother?" And then you have her like sort of stick up for the brother, and that's kind of sweet because she's been hating them all movie. Yeah. And likewise, because the older brother from next door is actually a nice guy, he actually kind of looks out for the little brother from the main house and tries to like help him and make him feel more brave. There's a lot of sweet dynamics that are kind of sprinkled throughout that just make it such a tight movie. So, yep, that's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. What's your number 12, David?
Number 12, I am going with one of the big boys. I am putting in Return of the Jedi.
You may continue.
Wow. Nowhere on your 25. That's incredible.
It was briefly at 25, 24 and got bumped.
That's fair. That's all right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's Return of the Jedi. To say anything else about it would just be piling on to everybody saying everything. I think the reason that it's up this high for me is that it is still a very well-made movie. It is still a very high quality part to it, but I do think that in terms of the original trilogy, it is the weakest. I think that it is one that like it leans a bit too heavily into the ideas of we're making these things for kids rather than we're making this just be a good movie. And that's where you get the stuff like the Ewoks. That's where it, really kind of slows down the pace of the movie a bit, probably a bit too much. But ultimately, like the in terms of the positives, I think that a lot of the Endor like forest chase scenes, that looks fantastic. It's got a great sense of speed to it. The entire final fight scenes between Luke and Vader, that's also top tier stuff. You got the opening sequence with Jabba on the barge. Like all of that was just straight up pulp adventure scenes. I think that it's got a bunch of memorable moments from it. And the only things that are really holding it back are pretty much the end of the second act leading into the third act, all that Ewok adventure stuff. But that's mainly just because I didn't really give Return of the Jedi attention until I was already in my teenage years. And I was like, kid stuff. Not a fan.
Yeah, it's funny you say the opening sequence with Jabba, and I'm like, if you actually go back and watch, that's like the first 35 to 40 minutes is that entire saga. It's like not just one little sequence. Yeah. No, I think that opening stuff is pretty great. I love the practical monster effects and all that. You get like almost like a stop motion animated thing that attacks them in the pit.
The Rancor.
No, not the Rancor. No. No. It's like
the pit. The pit one.
The gladiator combat area that they drop them down into.
No, that's the Rancor. You think it's a Sarlacc pit.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I recognized the name and assumed that was the thing that eats chump.
The Sarlacc is the little mouth that eats. The chump Boba Fett.
Yes, he's a chump. Yes.
Rancor is the big beast that gets the door dropped on him.
Yeah, and I do love all the final fight stuff with Luke and Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. I do think a lot of what the other characters are doing in the movie, though, and a lot of the middle, is just kind of busy work for the sake of we need to have plot here. It doesn't feel like it's actually important. And that's my big problem with Jedi, that I do think significantly makes it weaker than the first two. It's still good overall, and there's still things in it to like, but I do think the cracks are starting to show as far as like actually forming a full movie out of. So, yeah. Hence why it didn't quite make my list.
That is perfectly fine.
All right. My number 12 is Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
Hold.
I thought that might be a hold.
Just low one.
If anything, there might be more holds in this like top section just because a lot of the bigger ones are coming. All right. What's your number 11?
Number 11, I'm sure I'm going to get a hold for, and that is RoboCop.
Hold.
Yeah, look at that.
Yep. All right. My number 11, Back to the Future Part 2.
Hold your goddamn horses there, buddy. You knew this is going higher up on my list.
I had a sneaking suspicion it, mate. Yes.
Yep.
All right. What's number 10?
Number 10, let's just get on back to Road Warrior.
Okay, very good. On you go.
Yep. No, I mean it's Mad Max 2. It takes what everyone thinks of when they think of Mad Max and just defines it, because a lot of that first Mad Max movie is not what you think it is. It is a much more developed society. It feels much more early days of apocalypse, but Mad Max 2 is where they come in and they say, not only is everyone wearing leather, but we also get into the GIMP stuff. We also get into the gasoline towns and how important that is. It's the full development of what Mad Max will become as a character, and really just sets it all in stone. When anyone thinks of Mad Max, they think of Road Warrior.
Yeah. It basically defined what the post-apocalyptic setting could or would be, and everything that we've had since owes some thanks to it. Fallout, the series, right, the entire video game series and the TV show, would not exist without Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior.
Yep. Resident Evil 3, the movie.
Yeah, the movie specifically, yes, you're quite right. In fact, it owes a lot more to Mad Max than it does any Resident Evil games that it's supposedly based on, funnily enough.
Yeah.
So, yes. No, it's a really tight movie as well. It's 90 minutes long. It's, it's the reluctant hero who gets into something, but he's just too much of a hero to not help when the chips are actually down. Villains are quite dastardly. So, yeah, it's a classic for a reason, and it has been topped because Fury Road is insanely good, but Road Warrior is excellent and was the best of the original three. I think most people tend to think that and agree with that. No, I mean, obviously, there's always someone who's got like, yeah, you know what, I actually prefer, weirdly, the first or the third, but most people tend to agree on two.
Thunderdome's okay.
Thunderdome is okay. I have no problem with Thunderdome.
Yeah.
It's just not as good as Road Warrior. So, what is your... Well, it's my number 10.
I picked up the thread. What do you got?
Okay. Oh, yeah, we're on top 10 now. Hey, this is big, meaty ones. There you go. All right, number 10, coming back to another hold, and that is The Blob, the 1988 remake. So, no, this was such a surprise. This was one that I'd only discovered doing the show, and had wanted to see it, but it was kind of hard to come by for a while, for whatever reason. It was one of those weird movies where the rights were kind of wonky, at least internationally anyway. But finally got a chance to see it, and I enjoyed the original Blob well enough as a sort of super 50s movie, but didn't love it. It wasn't super important to me. This movie is some of the best and most fun practical effects of the era, and it also is insanely funny at times. There's stuff in this that legitimately was making me laugh. It takes some big swings with the characters and who you think is going to make it or not. To this day, I still quote, but hockey season ended months ago, which is legitimately one of the funniest lines of dialogue that I've heard in a movie in the last decade. So, like, it's honestly, it was such a pleasant, feel-good experience watching this, because it's just fun, grisly effects of this blob, which not only like consumes people, but you kind of see like it melts their skin, so you can see their skeleton inside of it, and it's oozing out of various things. It kind of does some things that were in the original movie, like it goes into a movie theater, but it's not really following the exact plot or the exact characters. It's kind of just taking the concept and doing its own broad thing with it.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched this, I didn't see the original. I came into this thinking, well, I didn't think it was the original, but I didn't know anything that it was copying or not copying. And it's such a nice little movie the whole way through. It's surprisingly high quality, because you hear the blob, you look at like the first, like, I don't want to say 10 minutes of the movie, something like that, and it feels like it's going to have an overly cheesy tone, so you don't expect that much from it. And then it just continues to surprise you with how well it actually manages to not only handle the physical, like, gore effects of it, like you said, the skin goes translucent and it gets very, very messed up very quick, but also just the storylines of the characters, the way they develop these people. Like, our main girl that we have here, I wouldn't expect her to take as much of just a straight up action hero role as she does, but she owns it and she makes it hers. Played
by Shawnee Smith, when I thought she would have been like 5 when this movie came out, but turns out she's about 10 years older than I thought, so fair enough. Because she was
got the Paul Rudd issues.
Well, she was no. It's not even so much that. It's just she just. I didn't think she popped up in things until the late 90s, and then it turns out, oh no, she was playing a teenager in 1988. And she was in like Saw 10 recently, and she's like, she's like 52 or something now. So it's like, damn, she's been around a lot longer than I thought. No, it's super fun, and it's worth mentioning one of the writers on it is Frank Darabont, who went on to do Shawshank and Green Mile, The Mist, and all those Stephen King adaptations. So it's like, oh, there's actually people in here that are really high quality like people. And the director, well, his career kind of went downhill. A movie he did just before this was the third Nightmare on Elm Street, which I think is the best Nightmare on Elm Street. So he's got a couple of big successes. So there is actually, like, when you look at the names involved, there's a couple of names that if you happen to know them from other things, like, oh, there's a reason why this might be great. But there's no reason to suspect that going in. So yeah, such a pleasant surprise. I can't recommend it enough. It's just a great B movie that's just constantly just doing fun stuff with the concept that it has.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is E.T.
Well, it's not a hold, it's I also have that at number 9.
All right, perfect.
So that syncs up nicely.
I thought for a moment there that you weren't going to call me to hold, and I was like, you don't have E.T. anywhere on your list?
I just didn't know what to say, because it's not, I mean, it's a hold, but only for like 1 second, because now I've said it too, so on you go.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I mean, it's E.T. Like, the same sort of thing with Star Wars. Who needs me to justify why E.T. is in the top 10 of a sci-fi list? It's got that same sort of vibe you were talking about with Explorers and Goonies sort of thing. It's a couple of kids find an alien, and they get to do all the cool things that kids would want to do if they had an alien. And then by the time the back half of the movie kicks in, it has established this relationship so well that once it starts to pick at it, you feel this deep emotional core to it. You feel the pain of these kids as E.T. starts, getting into trouble and having issues of his own. And it's just such a perfectly well-crafted movie to tap into that emotional core and just make you feel these things for these characters.
Yeah, so, and obviously there's the underscore and the subtext of where's the father? We never explain that, but it's lingering there to think about, like, as you're thinking about, maybe why this kid needs an attachment of some kind that he's seeking out and whatnot. But no, obviously, practical effects and all that. I love one of the things that, having watched it again in the last couple of years for the first time in, like, I don't know, 15, 20 years, whatever it had been, is that I was kind of impressed by kind of the intimidation of, like, the faceless government agents that were coming after and, like, hunting them, and it was always just, like, shots of their feet or their torches as they were looking around in the dark. That's how the movie actually starts, is, like, just these, it's basically the villains from the X-Files looking for the alien, like going around the forest and being very imposing as they do it. But that part is, I think, the thing I'd forgotten about that actually does hold up quite well. Plus, it's got the John Williams score, which is obviously top tier. It's got Dee Wallace as she is what I think of when I think of an 80s mum. I think of Dee Wallace because she did it in a lot of movies, but most famously in E.T. So, yeah. So, yeah.
Of course, a very young Drew Barrymore as well. I wouldn't say that she's a standout role in this movie, but she's there.
No, I mean, she's like 5 in this, so. But there you go. E.T. What's your number 8?
Number 8, I have Predator.
Hold!
I thought so.
My number 8 is The Empire Strikes Back.
No hold, but also it's my number 7. So
okay, right. This next. Okay.
Yep.
Empire Strikes Back obviously is very good. Now, I prefer the first movie for a couple of reasons. I do think I would critique a couple things in Empire because it does split up the cast, and I do find Luke's time with Yoda to be a little bit of a slog because I don't really care about that side of things too much, like the Jedi lore. But it does do a lot of smart things. When we did it on the show just last year, I was enjoying finding a lot more of the sort of the setup of the motivations for why certain characters are doing certain things, and like the just kind of what motivates like certain decisions that like Darth Vader makes in the movie and what's driving him to hunt who he's hunting and so on. There's a lot more nuance in the movie than I think I had remembered having not seen it in at least a decade at that point. So There is a lot of stuff to really like and appreciate in that film, and of course you get all the I mean, they're a little bit sullied now with some CG touch-ups and whatnot because we can't watch the original versions anymore, but there's still a lot of that aesthetic of the miniatures and like, you know, how they did the effects originally, even if they have kind of tampered with it a little bit here or there. And at the very least, Empire, out of the three of them, is the least that's been like hurt by that those touch, because you know, because original movie has the horrible CG Jabba scene, which is just unnecessary and really sticks out. The third movie has the Force Ghost changed at the end, which is just a slap in the face.
Bro, I don't even care about the Force Ghost change. In thinking about Return of the Jedi, the thing that sunk it down like an extra spot for me from where it would have been.
Oh, is the set with Jar Jar?
No, it's the part where there's just a musical number now with that singing little thing in Jabba's palace. Like that sequence, like if you're making touch-ups, fine, whatever, so be it. But like that was just unnecessary.
That's like 4 minutes. That's just dragging. Yeah, you could just cut that out. Yeah. In fact, they did cut it out originally.
Yeah. Let it sit there. But no, I agree. I think Empire, it does have its flaws. I'm not going to pretend that, you know, it's all the way down here at number 7, which I think to some people would be blasphemous. But yeah, it's got its problems, but I think that for what it ends up doing, having Irving Kershner as the director, it is
the esteemed director of RoboCop too.
Absolutely. It's got some subtleties to it. I think that it follows the same format where if you look at like what Star Wars was when it was initially being filmed compared to what it was made in the editing bay, I think it has that same sort of thing where if you look at the basic parts of the script, I think that Empire probably wouldn't be that incredible, but it's only because of the performances, the way that it's shot, the, you know, fight scene and the big reveal with Vader and all that. I think that that's the kind of stuff that it was pumped up in post that made it this extra something special.
Yeah, and they actually found a way to add like a character or two that are actually good additions. Like Lando is Orlando, sorry. Yes. Lando's a character in Babylon 5, so that was a slip there rather than me forgetting his name. Yeah. Lando is you know, Billy D. Williams is very likable, and I think all of that stuff and like his kind of betrayal, but he's actually still a good guy. Like all of that I think works really well. I think the Han and Leia stuff's my favorite part of the movie for the most part. I think that stuff really pops, and I think part of that is because they stay together the whole movie. Like they're playing off of each other, whereas Luke is, you know, he's off with Yoda doing weird meditation tricks and whatnot.
This movie also does one of those things where, I mean, there's several things in this movie, but it does one of those things with Yoda, I think, where it only works on people who don't know anything about Star Wars. Now that it has become such a thing, the whole Yoda training in the swamp and pretending to just be this crazy old guy for a while, like that entire sequence kind of drags.
Yeah, it's a chore to watch now. I feel the same way. It's just kind of a bummer to try and get through that until he finally says, "All right, fine, I'm Yoda, I'm a Jedi." That's that's Boogie. Oh, sorry, Boogie. That's we.
Yes. Boogie, we must.
Yes. But no, it's obviously very good. There's a lot of iconic scenes. All the stuff on the Snow Hoth planet at the start is, you know, super fun and exciting.
Yeah.
Really impressive for the time. So,
I mean, New Hope was kind of the one that breaks the mold, but I will always give the Star Wars movies credits for their first like 20, 30 minutes. They've got solid action scenes that get me engaged.
Yeah. Well, like you say, the first one, not so much, but yeah, like, Empire and Jedi,
Empire,
absolutely do.
Jedi. I would almost say Phantom Menace is there, but...
well, come on, that's not...
They falter because the back half of that is Jar Jar.
I mean, you can see they attempt to open with an action sequence. I'm not so sure they pull that off.
Yeah.
And of course, Attack of the Clones is fresh in the mind because that was the last episode.
Yes. I can't even remember. What did that one even open with? I can't even remember what it was.
It was them trying to kill Padme, and then, like, I guess it does have an action scene early on, but it's not right at the start. It's not until the assassination attempt where we get the first big action scene.
I would say that if we're structuring this the same as the other movies, everything up to the assassin being killed would be that first part. It would be like the whole action scene, which makes it sad that they slow down so significantly for half of that so that Anakin can go, I watch you while you sleep, Padme.
That's accurate. So, yeah, like I say, there is absolutely a large number of people who would say that Empire should be number one on this list, and there is absolutely no negotiating as to whether or not it should be or not. And that is the type of attitude, that pedestal that people put Star Wars on, that throughout my 30 plus years on this earth has made me enjoy not putting it there. Now, it never would be there for me because I don't like it as much as the other movies that I have above it, but I'm going to enjoy snubbing it a little bit by only... But hey, do you know what? The fact that I've even got it in my top 10 though is notable, because if I had done this list before I watched it again last year, it wouldn't have made my top 10. So take this as a win that I am agreeing that it's actually very good, but it's still never going to touch my favorites, which are coming. So...
Trust me, I know what to expect here. I have a feeling we're going to have a couple of holds, if only for a space or two.
Yes. So, yeah, what's your number... Well, that was your number 7. So it's my number
7, so back to you.
All right. Predator.
My number 8. There you go.
Wait. Oh, did you just hold that? Did we hold that already?
Yeah, I just held that, yeah.
Ah. Okay. Weird. All right. Anyway. Very good. So... It's perfect. What would you want me to say? It's perfect. It's the idea of, like, we're going to do a slasher movie, but instead of a bunch of dumb teenagers, we're going to have the most badass group of machismo assholes that you've ever met, and we're going to see in the opening act how good they are at what they do. And that's the point of that whole camp scene at the start. Is like, here's them functioning at 100% to show how cool and badass they are. It's like, remember Arnold in Commando a couple of years ago? Now he's got a team of Arnolds that are all like Commando from a couple of years ago, and they're efficient. So when the Predator, which is a fantastic design by Stan Winston, shows up and starts hunting them down, you're like, oh shit. Like, this sells him as this unstoppable monster, but also kind of like builds up to this like mano-a-mano thing where it's like, oh, he's doing this for sport, he's doing this for pride. So when Arnold has to finally challenge him one-on-one, the build up to that's like, it's perfect. It's like, and also, I've said this before when I've talked about Predator, but so many cheap movies shoot in the forest because it's free, and they think, oh, we'll just shoot a movie in the forest, it's easy, right? And they're all so boring. And it is a credit to John McTiernan, who like, you know, is saying something that this is actually slightly his, like, not his best movie. This is his second best movie because he also did Die Hard. But but Predator is like nipping on its heels. It's like, it's right there. It's so perfectly paced and constructed, memorable characters, great action sequences. Like I say, the Predator design is iconic. It sticks out. You remember him, and it's just such a unique idea. An alien comes to Earth, and he's not hunting because he's just a monster like the Xenomorph. He's hunting because he's intelligent and he enjoys the sport, and he only hunts the best of the best. And that's why Arnold and his team are his perfect targets. Beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's cinema.
No, I this is Kino. No, I agree. I was never big on Predator. Like, even before we started the show, I think the only thing I had ever watched was just a mercy killing of AVP. Yeah, not a great intro, but then I sat down, I watched the initial Predator, and I get it. I understand. Like, that is a very, very well constructed film. It does a great job of, I think, better than most other films I've seen. The only comparison is probably also Alien, that takes the threat and makes it so real. Like, it's this thing where there's so many other movies where they have, you know, the monster, the shape, whatever you want to call it, where you're just supposed to believe that it is this powerful. But ultimately, like you said, usually it's hunting down teenagers. And so you don't really get this feeling of, well, how strong is it really if it's just a bunch of teenagers? Putting them against an entire militia army here that's going into the woods, where you get actual proof of how strong they are, then saying, okay, and now they're going to get picked off one by one. That is a great way to establish just how strong your character is. And then by contrast, when we finally do whittle it down to the mano-a-mano fights, it makes it feel that much more powerful that one of them is actually able to hold their own.
Yeah, it makes it feel big. And it also, like, makes our team look great as well, because they are smart enough, and you get that they're smart enough to, like, okay, based on what we know and what we've discovered so far about how its hunting is, what are the rules? How can we fight back? You know, like everyone quotes, if it bleeds, we can kill it. But that actually taps into something I love about the movie, is that there's rules to this. How can we use what we have learned to win? Like, okay, we've got an enemy we don't understand, but what do we know about it? And obviously, as the movie goes on, they learn a bit here, a bit there, and by the end, Arnold's learned enough that he's able to have a chance. Like, he's like, okay, this is what we know, let's fight back. So,
yeah, it's the sort of thing where the Predator just feels like he's on top no matter what. It's only once you add in the extra knowledge that's gained over the course of the movie that we're able to get to any sort of solid footing to even go up against him.
Yeah, and to the Predator's credit as a character, it's not like once the playing field is somewhat evened, he chickens out and runs away. He's like, oh, now this is a real fight. Okay, great. Yeah. All right, let's go now.
It's like, this is what I've been waiting for. Perfect.
So, yeah, very compelling villain, compelling set of characters. And I think people, again, it's another movie that people just sort of, oh, it's just an Arnold movie. Yeah, it's fun, but it's just an actiony sci-fi movie. No, it's actually really well done. Like, it's actually really meticulous in how it tells its story. So, Predator.
I think this movie would be just as good without Arnold in it. Like, obviously, Arnold brings a certain panache to it, but I think that writing-wise, the quality's still there.
Yeah, you put in just anyone else who could be a convincing leader, and it would still, it would still work. He was just the best choice at the time, though, because he was the action star of the world when this movie was made.
Yeah.
So, perfect. All right, what's your number 6?
Number 6. So this was actually, I wrote out my entire list. And then as we were starting, like literally as you were doing the intro, I looked down at 6 and 7. So Empire Strikes Back in this next movie. And I swapped them because I was just like, no, that didn't feel right. So this was originally number 7. It got bumped up. And that is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Hold.
I thought so. Not one we've done on the show, but I figured it was something that
it's this one we'll get to at some point. My number 6 is one we have done on the show not too long ago, and that is The Abyss.
I guess continue, because that's my number 5.
There we go. Beautiful. I love that you've got this very high in your list, because it's one that people just don't really know about, and part of that's because there wasn't a good release to watch for such a goddamn long time. But now we have the nice 4K version. You can go check it out. Make sure you watch the longer cut, because the differences between the long cut and the short cut are wildly significant.
Yeah.
So, no, I remember liking this. I love the set, and obviously it's James Cameron playing with we're doing a story underwater, and there's aliens down there. But there's so much that I love about it. I love that it's the complete opposite tone of Aliens, because Aliens is the scary alien. This is this is like the more hopeful, bright alien that might be a friend, potentially, right?
Yeah.
But mostly I just love how strong the character writing is, where it's about, this married couple who are divorced or getting divorced, and it's their relationship that is on, like, under the microscope the entire time, and all the little ways it shows how they feel about each other, how the other characters feel about each other, and how that develops. Like, when we talked about the movie, we talked so much about how well, like, certain things later on in the script worked because of all the legwork they had done earlier on with all these characters, and just how much and then even just like the other side, which is the bigger, like, more ethical sci-fi debate of, like, what do we do if these things are down here, and you've got this military villain who's like, this is a threat, we have to nuke it, like, that's his first, like, response, basically. And that's the other big part of it that plays out, and all these things just work together, and you've got the cool underwater setting, you've got pioneering visual effects for the time. Like, it's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, I agree with all that, but just also add on, I love the dichotomy of it's essentially underwater oil drillers, more or less. It's got that sort of, dirty, cramped vibe to it, and they do a great job of setting up the tone of all of that, but then it perfectly contrasts when we do get the introduction to the aliens, who are just this wild and open, free, very whimsical, very light based, and so it immediately gives this other sense of the other. Like, this is not something that is human, because we've been watching humanity be dark and dirty this whole time. So it really just livens it up immediately, and it lets you know that it is, like you said, it's something that maybe is not inherently positive to mankind, but it isn't vicious. It isn't something that is, like you said, aliens. It isn't something that's a xenomorph coming down to kill us all. It's just doing its own thing and it is existing in its own way. And I think the biggest mark for this movie is the fact that it is so goddamn long, and yet you can sit through it and like the pacing is perfect. Like it just nails every single bit to it, where you don't feel the time passing at all, even with the extended cut.
Yeah, it feels well to say it because obviously there was a shorter cut. It was literally released with like 30 minutes cut out of it. But I don't think there's anything in that long cut that I would want taken out. Like everything feels important. Everything feels necessary and like adds into what's happening for the themes, for the character journeys, for like what the movie does with the ending. Like everything feels essential to what's happening in the story. There's not a single thing I would take out. So it's wild that like he had to, and he picked to take out what he did. Which, if you wanted to get our full thoughts on that, like definitely check out the meaty review we did. But yeah, honestly, like this is one that I'd almost worried that the mystique of not being able to really watch it in good quality for like 20 years was going to like hurt it because it's not as perfect as I had it in my mind from seeing it a few times when I was a teenager. But no, I held up. If anything, it exceeded my expectations when I went back to watch it again. So,
all right,
there you go. The Abyss, excellent. All right, what's number 5?
The Abyss. Back to you.
That's right. Okay, yeah, good point. My number 5 is RoboCop.
All right, that was my number 11.
There you go. Yeah, this is another one that has only gotten better with age. My age. I mean, the movie's age too, sure, but like my age in the sense that as a kid, it's a fun action movie about a cyborg who's taking out bad guys, and it's violent, which is something that's nectar to my eyes, even as a kid. Getting older though, and you realize what it's playing with, you know, what it's talking about in terms of its science fiction themes, the satire elements of consumerism and individuality and all these things that it's playing with, that again is only become enhanced as I've been more like tuned into certain world events in the last decade or two, and how this movie is still shockingly so relevant. Peter Weller's great as RoboCop. Nancy Allen is a great addition to the cast. The villains are so easy to hate. Like, you cannot wait until their dicks get blown off. It is so satisfying.
Yeah.
Plus, one of the best scores in cinema history. Like, the music is absolutely bombastic. It's big. It's heroic. It's emotional at times. Like, it's so memorable in like every way.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't as attached to RoboCop. I never watched it growing up, so that's why it's a little bit lower down on my list. I just, don't have that same level to it, but I can fully recognize the skill, the talent that went into it. It does have a biting satire to it. The fact that it does just stop and do commercials partway through, like, ballsy move, but damn, does it really drive home the point it's trying to make. Like, I love the little biting satires that it has there. And like you said, the villains are so incredibly hateable that even though the fact that, like, personally, they don't do that much to RoboCop himself, like, you still want to see them get their just desserts just from how evil they're being in general. Like, it is just, they're bad people. So yeah, I fully agree. I think it's again, it kind of feels like it is one of those anti-Reagan sort of movies, like all of that sort of stuff that was going on in that culture, but it plays it so high concept that it's just able to stand on its own regardless.
Yeah, it's funny at times. The design of all the sci-fi elements looks cool. Ed 209's pretty iconic as well. So yeah, there's not a lot to fault. I mean, the only thing I'll say is that RoboCop 2 probably has the best commercial that beats the ones in the first one. Yeah, which is the one with the internet speed commercial where the guy kills himself. That was
so out there. Just like, what am I gonna do? Bang.
Oh, that broke me when we did. Obviously, it's not an 80s movie, so
yeah.
Now, admittedly, would RoboCop 2 make my list if it was an 80s movie? I don't know, but like certainly it wasn't eligible anyway, so it doesn't matter. So all right.
And also, RoboCop 3 coming up very soon.
That is true. That is coming soon. Yep. What is your number 4?
Number 4. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble with you for this one. I don't know how high up you have it. I'm sure you have it higher. Terminator.
Hold.
Yep. Fair enough.
Yeah, okay. My number 4 is The Thing. So
okay,
let's bring that one back round. And I'm pretty sure we have the exact same... Well, no, because Terminator was your number 4. But I'm pretty sure you have my top 3.
I don't. which is, I'm curious where the overlap's going to be here. We'll see.
I'm sure you've got all of these somewhere, but okay, whatever.
Okay. Yeah, we'll if anything, I may have already brought it up, but we'll see where it's at. Anyway.
Yeah, okay. Fine.
What do you like
about
the thing? Yeah.
It's one of the best things about paranoia ever made. It's the idea that anyone in the room could be the bad guy and we don't know. So everyone's on edge. And again, much like the Abyss being set underwater, setting a movie at like a research base in like Antarctica, I think it is such a, or maybe it's the Arctic, whatever one, I can't remember which one it is, but
yeah, whichever.
Yeah, but like it's such an isolated location where they are trapped, they're on their own, and they rely on their base with the heating and the power to keep them alive, and they're so fragile out here. And it's the sort of thing where you have like such a small group of characters, but they become kind of like a microcosm representation of society as a whole. So one character thinks they should all do this, that kind of represents an entire group of people who in the world would all be saying this is what we should do, and so on and so on. So you see how society breaks down through this like example of a small group. It's like a petri dish. This is the small group of characters in the petri dish, and we're watching them unfold. But it kind of represents what would happen if it ever expanded beyond that. But it's got the cool pulsing score that a lot of Carpenter movies have. It's got great practical, insane effects with the thing so stuff.
Good.
Yeah, and then Kurt Russell's obviously, just killing it.
For me, I think what I most appreciate is the practical effects. I think that I never actually went back to watch, but there was that remake in like 2011, I think, and I remember one of the big things being that movie was filmed with practical effects, and then they went over after the fact with special effects because it just didn't look as good. And I just got to call no balls on that. Like, screw you. This movie managed to pull it off back in the 80s. You should be able to do that. And that just is a testament to like just how well skilled the people making the props in this movie were to be able to pull off that level of horror with it, that even years later when they're trying to remake it, they can't get it quite right. So top tiers on that. And then also, I like that as much as you're saying the characters are a microcosm, none of them are stupid. Like all of them are making what to them are rational decisions, and you understand each of their viewpoints. There isn't somebody who's like, so hey guys, let's just go to the mainland now.
What you're saying is that they missed one demographic, and that was the idiots.
Yeah. To be fair, living in a society post-pandemic and all that, we should have a full demographic that's just like, nah, there's nothing here. Let's go home.
To be fair to the movie, though, this is all people who are qualified to be out on this research base, so it maybe cuts out some of the riffraff a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, no, it's gruesome, but like, again, the thing that really sells it is the paranoia. It's the fact of, even as an audience member, you don't know. You just never know who you can trust in this movie, and you find out as the characters find out.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I think it's Carpenter's second best movie, behind Halloween, of course. But in terms of science fiction, it is his best, I would say. So,
okay,
that's number 4. All right, what's your number 3?
My number 3, which you haven't mentioned yet, is Back to the Future 1.
Not Hold, because it's my number 3 too.
Number 3. All right. Yeah. It's Back to the Future. Man, I love time travel. I love this movie. It is so just perfectly made. Like there are very few things I can even fault about it, and the only things that I can really fault are only in reference to number 2 and 3 were made. You know? Like, it's stuff that I would have liked to see more of a continuous arc over the trilogy, but obviously this movie couldn't have known that going into it. So all in all, it's got a ultra likable cast of characters. There's nobody in this that like does not pull their weight over the course of the movie. All the little feedbacks that you get of setup through the first like 20-30 minutes that pay off over the course of him exploring the town, just fantastic. And then again, the entire third act has this level of tension to it that just, it works. It's amazing that every single second of it you're like, oh god, that's gonna happen. And like, you know that he's going to make it back to the future, but you still are sitting on the edge of your seat watching and waiting for this stuff to pay off because it's so high octane. So top tier.
I mean, the genius of the premise, other than the fact that he interacts with his own parents in the past and all the malarkey that comes from that, it's just the simplicity of the problem here is that to fuel the time machine, we need this amount of power, and the only way to do that is a lightning strike. But we know when one's going to be. So, like, just the simplicity of that, and it's also something I like about the third one, which is like, oh, we just need to get the car moving fast enough, but there's no gasoline because it's not invented yet. How do we get around that? So, the level of problem solving I really like. They also, one of the best scores as well. The music from Alan Silvestri is next level. It is up there, and I would argue surpassing many of the biggest John Williams scores. I think it is in that upper echelon of just iconic. Like, I've never done like a top 10 like movie scores list. Maybe I should at some point. I feel weird about doing it on YouTube though, because I think you expect to hear it, but copyright's
you get flagged pretty hard.
Yeah, maybe more of a
Patreon.
Like a Patreon thing. Yeah, but regardless, I like Back to the Future is pretty damn near perfect, and it's hard to fault. The casting's perfect. It's such a tight script, like one of the tightest scripts I think ever. Like I've went through the movie with a fine-tooth comb on like multiple occasions at this point, and like I can barely find anything to fault. Really, it's miraculous, and it's got such a spirit to it that just is endearing. So yeah, what else is there to say? We reviewed this not too long ago, so if you want to go see our 2.5 hour discussion on Back to the Future and all the hidden depths and how much we love it, you can go and check that out quite happily. All right, what is your number 2?
I think I just did Back to the Future, didn't I? Unless you said that was also
that was also my number 3. So
all right, number 2. This is where I might get in some hot water here. My number 2 is Aliens.
Hold. What?
Okay.
You think I'd be mad that it's your number 2?
Yes, absolutely. I'm terrified. Don't hurt me.
Weird.
I think you might give me crap for it because of what it's placed under, but we'll get to it.
Yeah, I actually don't know what your number 1 is. I'll have to give some thought of that. Okay. Wait, actually, no. Wait a minute. I think I know what it is. I don't think you've said that one yet. Okay. I think I've placed it. All right. Never mind. My number 2 is The Terminator.
Okay. Yep, that was number 4 for me.
Yeah. And this is another one that I actually just watched a couple of weeks ago because I did an analysis video looking at the opening scenes of The Terminator. So I watched it again, actually after I did that, because I'm working on another analysis video for it. And I love the Terminator is so fundamental to like so much of my taste. The unstoppable killer, all of the lore of like the future that both him and Kyle Reese come from. This idea of this cyberpunk future horror movie of this unstoppable machine. But at the center of it, you've got a main character whose arc is so simple. She is not ready to take on real responsibilities. Her life is frivolous. Her biggest concern is that she doesn't have a date for Friday night. She doesn't know how to defend herself. But over the course of the film, she's thrust into it. And this idea that whilst the rest of the world remains ignorant and the police station and all the people who don't listen or understand what Kyle's saying to them, she ultimately comes to believe him and is able to kind of become like the warrior of Sarah Connor that most people think of when they think of T2 specifically. But I think Terminator 1's a better movie than T2. T2 is a great movie. This is not a knock on T2. But Terminator 1's atmosphere, its pacing, I think Terminator 2, in comparison to T1, so just in comparison, I think it feels a bit more clinical than the Terminator. It feels a little glossier. Terminator feels, it's grittier. It's in the streets of LA in the 80s. It feels more nail biting in a lot of ways. I like the score better as well. I think scores in both movies are fantastic, but the Terminator 1 score with the synth just feels like it fits what the movie's doing in a way that just clicks. And I think all 3 of the main characters are all fascinating to watch, and they're all very different as well. You've got this war-torn hero from the future who doesn't know how to function in the present day. Sarah's this young innocent woman who is not ready for all of this chaos and this world of darkness descending upon her. And then you've got the Terminator, who you could argue is not a character in the traditional sense, but he is, and he's so fascinating to watch and how he interacts with people and how he functions, and the performance of Arnold, who probably does not get enough credit that he should for the body language that he uses in that movie and just how he sells the idea that he is a machine and not a person. It's exceptionally well done, and yeah, I could gush for
No, I
ever.
mean, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying there. I think the only thing for me is that I didn't grow up with the movie. It's not something I saw until much later in life, probably like mid to late teens. And I like all the time travel aspect to it. I like this idea of you are basically the prophesied one who is going to give birth to our Messiah, more or less. It is a great examination of like having this sort of importance thrust upon you, and like how do you react to that, especially when you're just, you know, a regular ass person who's just been thrown into this. Add on top of it all of the high concept stuff of what is coming in the future. It's great there. I think the only thing that's holding it back for me a little bit is just because it does have its roots both equally in sci-fi and horror. Like the Terminator is essentially the Shape. It is this horrifying thing that will never stop hunting you down, and it's just always going to be there. And yeah, I'm just not as big of a horror guy. So
that's what makes it good, though. What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, it's just difference in taste. When I go to sci-fi, I'm much more of the cerebral. I'm much more of, I enjoy like the high concept, like thinky movies rather than the, oh, I have to be scared for my life for however long this is going to last.
I don't think Scary Killer and the cerebral thinkies are mutually exclusive. I think you can absolutely have both of those together in harmony.
Yeah, no, they absolutely can be. But this one was a lot closer. Like, I didn't have to think so much about like, oh, because she's changing this about the timeline, like this is going to happen. Like, no, it was all about how do we escape the giant metal man that's wearing human skin.
Yeah, but the subtext is more as it's a story about someone growing up. It's someone like the idea that our son's going to be important is just about the inevitability of your life is going to have to change at some point, even though you're not ready for it to change. So it's kind of a metaphor there as opposed to
let me be clear. When I say cerebral thinking movies, I'm not talking about like lacking metaphor. I expect movies at this caliber are going to have metaphor. I'm saying like one of my favorite sci-fi films is Inception. Like that kind of level of there's not this horrific threat going on. It's just a thinky movie.
I believe his own inner demons are the horrific threat in that movie.
Except it's not a Shape following you. You're just messing with me now.
It's a scary woman who's trying to stab him and everyone that he knows.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm not afraid of women.
You saying women can't be dangerous killers? That's not a sexist of you, David.
Yeah, that's the part that you're going to come down here.
Look, I believe a woman could stab me just as much as a man could stab me.
Absolutely true. I believe in that equal ability of stabbing people.
Yes. All right. What's your number? It's your number one. Time.
Yeah, my number one. Yeah. I mean, you've already figured it out. It was one you brought up a while back, and I feel like a parody saying this, but it's Back to the Future 2. I love this goddamn movie. I love it so much.
I did not see this coming.
I know. What did you have this at?
This was number 11.
11, so just outside your top 10.
Just outside. It's not disappointing. It's great, but I can put Back to the Future 2 above like most of what clearly not because I didn't, but like I like if I put it head to head with Predator, RoboCop, The Thing, Back to the Future 1, like it's not beating those.
Right, but then let me just go back on what I said there in terms of like the more horror aspects of it. Predator, big scary thing trying to kill you. The Thing, big scary thing trying to kill you. The Abyss, not technically, but the ocean's scary as hell. And then Terminator. So all that stuff, like whatever. But here's the thing why Back to the Future, and the reason that I am putting it so high, including over number 1, because I think number 1 is a perfect film. I absolutely love that movie. However, what I think 2 does is it takes everything from 1. And mind you, it does require 1 to exist. It's like a DLC pack. Like this movie on its own, I don't know about. But number 1, assuming you've seen that, going into 2, it takes every one of the things that make 1 great and expands upon it. And not only that, it is the definitive rules of how I go into movies and think about their time travel. Like, if it doesn't follow Back to the Future rules, it needs to explain its own stuff because I take Back to the Future as the default. It has managed to ingrain itself of you can go back in time, you can mess with things, it will cause an alternate timeline, but then you can get it back on track. That is how I view time travel, and it is 100% because of this movie. Add on top of that, the ways that it defined culture of we were all expecting or wanting the things that it was saying was happening in 2015 to happen. It was like the defining thing of where's my hoverboard? The alternate timeline, when we go to Biff's world, Christ almighty, that hits so much harder than it ever has any right to.
Turns out that was predicting 2016 onwards.
Yeah, it was right there, and possibly 2025 onwards as well. So great. And then just again going back into the past again to revisit all the stuff from the first movie, but from a different lens and doing its own creative plot there as well while expanding on the first. Every single sequence in this movie works at 100% for me, and I cannot gush about it enough. And then perfectly ends to set up the next sequel as well. So all of it just top tier marks.
Yeah, it's a great sequel.
All right, that's good. Moving on.
It's a great sequel. I like it expands on things. It does, but like this is not as perfect as the first one.
That's fair.
It's as simple as that. But I do love like it. By doing the new things with the time mechanics that it does, it successfully does something new and different. It doesn't just feel like a rehash. Even though it literally goes back to the first movie, it feels like it's playing with its elements rather than just, it's not a nostalgia thing. It's like, no, how can we use the time travel and like do things around what we did before? It all comes from a really genuine place of creativity as opposed to how can we shamelessly show, oh, it's Maximus's armor. It's not that. So
yeah, that's
anyway. All right, my number one. Anyone who knows me will not be surprised by this pick, and that is Aliens. Now, admittedly, I feel a little bit like a basic bitch for having a James Cameron movie for both number one and number two. But when I really stopped and tried to argue that I should bump something up a spot or two to split them up, I thought I'm just doing it to split them up, not because I actually feel that they aren't number one and two, because they absolutely are. Aliens, as much as Back to the Future 2 is a great sequel, Aliens is the best sequel ever made. And I will stand on that, largely because there's very few movies where I think a sequel so expertly stands toe-to-toe with the original. And I'm not going to say that, I mean, you could watch Aliens on its own and it'll work well enough, but I still would always recommend you watch Alien first. But it feels so well fleshed out and exists to have its own ideas and do its own interesting things. It like focusing on it from a very different perspective of we're going to do action this time. Like the original movie, it's a bunch of truckers in space who are attacked by an alien. The second movies, we're going in with the elite team, the squad, the Colonial Marines, who think they're hot shots. They think they're Johnson and Johnson from the FBI and Die Hard, that nothing can stop them, only to be humbled immediately when they actually go up against them. And no one listens to John McClane, I mean Ripley. Right? Now, obviously Aliens came first, but I'm just making those comparisons as a joke because some of the same hubris is kind of at show. And it's all about tearing them down and then sort of them finding their own strength again and going through Aliens. It expands the idea of what the company is, Will and Yutani. It expands the idea of the aliens themselves because of the introduction of the Queen. And while most additions to the alien life since Aliens has been mostly lackluster, if not terrible, the Alien Queen is such a perfect addition because it adds to the themes that the first movie was playing with. This idea of, the first movie is a horror movie about giving birth against your will. It's clear what subject the movie is talking about.
Right.
Something that is sadly just as relevant today as it was in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
This movie takes that further by this idea of childbirth, motherhood, and going with those themes. Ripley is now going to form a motherly bond with someone who is not her child. The Alien Queen is the mother of the aliens, and it's just this monster that is nothing but that, and this fight between them of the natural, it's the genetic birth versus the bond of actual motherhood, even though there's no biological relation between Ripley and you. That stuff is perfect. All the weapons are cool, and the fighting of the aliens. Like so much of Aliens is also just ingrained into my taste. Like so much of what I like about the Resident Evil video games is kind of traced back to Aliens. The idea of a safe room where you can escape the horrors for a little bit. They do that in the movie. The idea of finding like, okay, we go to the place where something bad already happened and we discover the aftermath. Like something went down here. We can find some notes in the lab about what they were doing, but where did they go? What was this firefight where they were defending? Like the mystique.
Right.
The mystique as they go into that planet, LV-426 and Aliens, is almost more effective to me than the original movie when they go down to the planet and they find the alien ship. Like, obviously that stuff's perfect as well for its own reasons, but this almost has more mystique to me because, no, this was a civilization that's now just gone. Like, what the hell happened here? But and you can kind of guess to an extent, but like the discovery and the fact that no one's believing it's as bad as like Ripley is obviously concerned it is, and it just keeps it like it's perfect.
I really like that changeover as well, of the fact that they set it so much later. Like, you know, you have the cryo sleep, and so they set it decades later after the fact, because it gives credence to the idea of why they are ignoring Ripley. It's like, you were a space trucker, and that was like 100 years ago. Like, we have made advancements, we are Marines, everything will be fine. And to the credit of the movie, the Marines are able to handle an individual xenomorph.
Oh,
like,
they are, yeah.
They make it so it's like, look, you know, we are able to handle the threat that gave you so much trouble. It's only because there are multiple of them, and then we introduce the higher tier of them as well, that it becomes overwhelmingly bad odds for them.
Yeah, it's a natural evolution as well, because it's like, okay, you had one alien, but what if they were able to keep making more aliens? Then shit, like how does it? What happens then? And you get to experience that, and of course, all the like the Marines are so well like built up and developed. Like you can like there's a good half dozen of them that are so easy to remember. Obviously, Michael Biehn as Hex, Bill Paxton as Hudson. Like you have these memorable characters. You have Bishop, of course, who's sort of flipping the idea of the android as well from the first movie. Like it does so many things. Like in so many movies since Aliens have tried to do the ensemble cast and the way that Aliens does it, and it's hard to do because like something about the writing of a group like this and making them all click where you can remember who they all are, even though you don't really have that much time to introduce each one in person individually. Part of it is like being smart with how you pair them up and sort of remembering how like these two are friends or these two sort of have this running like argument or debate going on, and that happens a lot. Even like not even just between the Marines, but like even like Newton Hudson have like a running thing where he keeps freaking out and saying I'll put her in charge or whatever, but then there's moments later when he's the one that protects her, and it's like a little payoff to the fact that they built up that he was kind of the scaredy cat guy who was freaking out, but when push came to shove he was stepping up and being the protector and doing what he was supposed to do, and it kind of makes him endearing even though he is a bit of a chicken shit with the way he talks a lot of the time. So yeah, honestly,
I think with modern movies the biggest issue that's coming up that like they are afraid to let the audience know it's okay, you don't have to get attached to this character. Like a lot of, as much as it is a full ensemble, there are a few in there that aren't going to make it to the end of the movie.
Oh, there's some red shirts for sure, yeah.
Yeah, the way that they personify them kind of lets you know. They kind of let you know, like, look, here's his characterization, but don't get too attached. And like they tell you that pretty much up front through the way they deliver the characters.
There is one or two that feel like they might be part of the main team going forward that do go early on. Like I think there's two or three that stick out as like, oh, they were developed enough that I could have bought that they were going to stick around with the other survivors, but they didn't. And that's but obviously there's some red shirts where they're just there for fodder.
But that's what modern movies, they want every character to be that. They want every character to be, oh, aren't you shocked that they aren't going to be able to make it through to the end? Like they're not willing to just give some characters a little bit less personification just so they can give you that big like shock moment of, oh, I thought they were going to live.
Yeah. So no, and obviously it's, again, Stan Winston doing effects here. Also did effects in Terminator, funnily enough, since I mentioned that. And it's I love Aliens. It's kind of it's when I think of what a movie can be, I'm thinking of Aliens pretty much. So
I have do you have a specific definitive version?
Aliens is a funny one because I think I lean towards the theatrical for a few reasons. I like all the things that are in the extended cut for the most part. The one big thing though that I don't like being there is seeing the colony operating before things go bad, because I think it takes away from the mystique of just going in with Ripley and the team not knowing. I just wish that there's a bit in the middle with the set up like turrets, which I really like in the extended cut, and I wish that if you took that out of the extended and put it in the theatrical cut, but left everything else out, that would be my perfect cut. But that doesn't exist. Either I have to go with the theatrical, the special edition, but yeah.
You can make the Peter cut. You can do the fuzz cut.
It's funny because when I look at Cameron's movies, Aliens, I lean towards the theatrical, but I do think there's positives in both, to both cuts. Abyss, it's like, no, 100% special edition, theatrical is worthless, basically. Don't watch that cut. And then you go to Terminator 2, and it's back to the other, where I'm like, no, the pacing's not that good in the special edition. Watch the theatrical, it's much better paced. So it's just funny that I've bounced backwards and forwards between these different versions. But,
yeah, fair enough.
Hey. All right, well, there you go. That's the top 25s. So obviously we had a lot of overlap, especially towards the end, unsurprisingly. And there was a few things, like one of the movies that I was sort of hinting at earlier when I was deciding things was The Fly, which it's been too long since I've seen it, and I really couldn't justify putting it above a lot of things because I just didn't remember it well enough, even though I remember it being good. I think I need to see it again before I can fully commit to it, but I was very tempted to put Godzilla 1984 on the top 25 because I really like that one. But and then there's a couple of other ones that could make it, like another Cronenberg movie is The Dead Zone, which again on a rewatch I might bump up.
Dead Zone was an easy drop for me. I was really tempted to watch The Fly before going into this. That's not one that I've ever seen before, but I wanted to have it under my belt.
Interesting.
The issue that I ran into is I had some Cronenberg on the very end of my list, and then as I was like getting more stuff, watching more homeworks, it just kept dropping off. So I just figured it was probably a safe bet that it wasn't going to make it on there, but that was the one where I thought there was a chance at least.
Yeah, a childhood favorite that maybe will go up again when I see it again is Flight of the Navigator. That's one that stuck out to me. And then another one that I really was pleasantly surprised by that could go up in future watches and as time goes on is Extra, which was kind of a weird little bonus movie we did on Ace a long time ago, but it's actually quite good. So yeah, those were the things that kind of stuck out as being like maybes in the future. Maybe The Quiet Earth as well as another one that kind of stuck out. So I guess what I'm saying is that when we do revisit the 80s eventually, years from now, it might be like a bigger list, because at that point it's like, hey, we could do a top 35 now or something. But
there were two that I didn't have time to rewatch. I have seen them before, but I wasn't confident enough to join them on. And they're ones that are unconventional because of various things. And that is the anime film Akira.
Okay.
I know you're not big on anime, but I think that has a reasonable shot just because of the impact it's made. And you want to talk about Cronenberg. That is a Cronenberg movie, wholesale. And then the other one is actually a satire / parody, which is Spaceballs.
I've not seen that, so yeah.
Yeah, it's questionable. I need to rewatch it. I know that some of the jokes land better than others. It's not like 100% laughs the whole way through, but I do think that there is enough there to at least be in the conversation for one of those movies that, like Night of the Comet, where it's just catching that era of like, all the Star Trek stuff, all the Star Wars stuff, just taking over the world. Yeah,
I will say a couple of notable omissions that people might be going, where the hell was this? I will say, and this turned out to be both of us, because I didn't know where you were going to put them, but Escape from New York, a lot of people like that. I'm very lukewarm on it. And then the other bigger one, arguably, is Blade Runner, which I have tried to like that movie so many times, because there's a lot of like things to like about it, but ultimately it's never really been something that I could it would never make my top 25. I'm not even sure if it would make my top 50 if I did a 50 list.
No, I did my homework for that on Man Facing Southeast, and the big thing that I kept coming back to was like I kept trying to engage with it. I kept trying to like work in the world that it was there with, but I just could not get invested. Like there was something about the writing, something about the characterization where it was just so stonewalling me from all of this. It was just like all the characters were so dry and nobody was giving me any sort of anything to latch onto. So yeah, I can recognize that there are some people out there who just love the Blade Runner universe, at least from the first one. Not for me. I haven't seen 2049 though, so.
Yeah, and apparently, just from a quick count, I think we had 17 overlapping movies, which isn't surprising, given that it's a pretty narrow, like window. Like this is like a list of a very specific categories, so it makes sense.
I think my total number, I think that I was considering was like 42, so I didn't have a huge amount to pull from there.
Yeah, I was up to about 50, but there was definitely stuff there that was never going to make it. It was just sort of like doing all the work to make sure that...
Are you telling me that you didn't sit there and seriously consider Krull?
It's not even on my long short list. Like, I never even entered my mind as a possibility.
Pete. Such a shame.
Absolute trash. All right? Absolute trash. I hated that movie. All right, well, there you go. That is our top 25 sci-fi movies of the 1980s. I don't know... I do know, kind of, because we're planning in a few months' time to do a top 10, although it's going to be a joint top 10 list, where we're doing the top 10 sci-fi movies of this decade so far, or the first half of the decade, maybe a better way of putting it, basically 2020 to 2024. And we're going to do that in a few months' time. So that'll be like another little mini countdown. And then I don't know what the next bigger decade countdown we'll do is. It may be revisiting a decade that me and Tara did a long time ago with some changes or whatnot. But who knows when that'll be. It tends to be like a maybe yearly, maybe every other year kind of thing. But we will be back to that at some point in the future. But this, of course, is the final episode of the show of the year. And
New Year's Eve today.
Is it? Oh, I didn't even check what day we were landing on. But yeah, next week, no episode next week. There's a gap. And interesting, I'll explain this here a little bit, I suppose, is that that's actually the last gap, at least for a Tuesday. And what I mean by that is, if you're on YouTube, basically there'll always be a show on Tuesday. It'll usually be Ace 90% of the time, but every so often, instead of having a gap, there'll be a collector's cut, which is the other show me and David do. On a Tuesday instead. So if you're on YouTube, it doesn't really change that much because you're just sort of used to things getting your feed. If you're on the audio feed of the show, it's not too hard complicated. It just means that instead of there being a gap every 6 months, the gaps will be a little bit more random, but I've went out of my way to try and make sure that they're never there's never too many close together. So, but that's just a slight change to the scheduling going forward. It's the same number of Ace episodes like for the whole year versus this year. Same with Collector's Cut. They're just being a little bit more free form in the way the schedule works, just to allow for certain things with new releases and whatnot. But so gap next week, and then we'll be back with a RoboCop 3 as the first episode of 2025. So look forward to that. All right. You can support the content. You can support the show over on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get 2 monthly bonus shows that me and David do. One is called the Criterion Cut, where we do movies from the Criterion Collection. And then the other one is Extra Reels, where we do some of the worst things ever made. We did a Christmas movie called Hot Frosty this month for Christmas season.
Yeah.
Picked by a patron. And we've done all sorts of bad things before. And then, of course, there's bonuses for other stuff. There's a bonus streams after midnight every month on there as well. So go check out that stuff if you want to support everything and help keep it coming. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.